I was always ignored by my parents. As I grew up, my parents pulled me back home and forced me to take responsibility for my brother. When I started packing and left, my parents barely noticed. I was 25 at the time, just out of college, and ready to go it alone. However, I wasn't surprised by it. All my life, I had been the youngest of 5 children. I mean significantly younger when I say youngest. Emily, who is the next oldest, is 7 years older than I am. I'm different from the rest in a lot more ways. As a child, I occasionally felt like I didn't exist. My siblings continued to have affairs. Everything was left to me to handle. You've heard of glass children, youngsters whose siblings demand so much attention that they are ignored or become invisible. I guess I was. My brothers were constantly in and out of treatment programs, therapists' offices, and hospitals for whatever reason. I became the kid who didn't require much since I was okay. I didn't cause problems because I wasn't as ill or having difficulties as others were. So I was overlooked. I don't think that was intentional, but that's how it ended up. I didn't get the best attention. I can't say I had a terrible upbringing. I had everything I could possibly need in terms of food, shelter and clothes. However, I didn't exist emotionally. No one asked how my day went or whether I needed homework assistance. I improved my self-entertainment skills. It turns out that my friend played video games. Books gave people a way to escape. I would immerse myself in imaginary worlds while my brothers were losing themselves in real-life problems. I guess it was a survival strategy, although I didn't know at the time. Since I knew I wasn't creating any issues, I kept under the radar. I was not required to volunteer as a caregiver, in contrast to some others who had ailing family members. All of that was handled by my parents. I guess this was how they protected themselves, but they ignored me in the process. Although I didn't receive much attention, I also wasn't pressured to mature too soon. When all of your efforts are focused on keeping one or more children alive, the person who is not in crisis gets lost. I was that person. It wasn't completely awful. Laura and Sophie, who were basically my saviors, became friends by the time I was 9. We connected over that unspoken knowing, even if their houses weren't very attractive either. All we had to do was understand one another. We didn't need to tell each other why we felt ignored or invisible. We would spend hours at one another's houses to avoid the drama in our own families. Compared to the family I was born into, Laura and Sophie felt more like my own family. By the time we started middle school, we were clinging to each other like lifeboats in a hurricane. It wasn't much different in high school. My relationship with my parents remained distant, but my relationships with Laura and Sophie grew closer. We had ups and downs like any other adolescent, but the 3 of us remained close. We decided to attend the same university after graduating together. It was almost a given when it came time for college. We would go together, of course. It had nothing to do with academics or the school, but rather with maintaining our small family. After doing so, we remained inseparable for 4 years. After graduation, we decided to move to a different state, away from the chaos we were accustomed to. We set up our life in a tiny apartment. It was wonderful to be out on our own and finally focus on ourselves rather than balancing years of familial burdens. My parents barely heard from me for a while after that. I didn't imagine they would suddenly become interested in my life now because, to be honest, we hadn't talked much even when I was living at home. My mother would occasionally text me, generally with trivial questions like, "How's work?" or "What are you up to?" However, we rarely actually talked about anything. It was better that way, or at least that's how I saw it. I no longer required their attention. Sophie and Laura were enough. For once, I didn't feel like an abandoned child because we all had our own lives and goals. I was rather proud to have started a small family of my own. When my mother called last year, that began to alter. Thanksgiving was a few days away. I knew something was awry when her name appeared on my screen because I hadn't spoken to her on the phone in over a year. The last time Mom called, it was to let me know about my sister's burial arrangements, so phone calls always made me wonder. She immediately got to work asking me what time I was leaving for Thanksgiving at home. I was, to put it mildly, perplexed. First of all, I was unaware that they were even celebrating Thanksgiving because we didn't really observe holidays. We celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving more times than I can count on one hand when I was a child. It was just not a trait of our family. Given our long-standing tradition, it seemed inappropriate to hear her ask in this manner. I told her I wouldn't be attending. I was planning. Laura, Sophie and I had been planning a ski trip for months. I couldn't possibly cancel that with only 3 days' notice. Aside from that, I couldn't afford a last-minute plane ticket because I lived 2 states away. My mom didn't get it. She seemed as if I was being deliberately difficult when I tried to explain it to her, guilt-tripping me by saying that she would be alone herself because my dad was spending Thanksgiving with my brother Mike at the facility where he works. It seems that Mom would spend the majority of the day alone while my dad was away. See, I got this. I understood why she wanted company, but she gave me 3 days' notice. She thought I would drop everything. When I told her again that I couldn't make it, she got upset and began to act as if I didn't care about the family. She said I was self-centered. After that, she hung up. For a while, I sat there feeling a peculiar mixture of regret and bitterness. Where had they been for me all those years, even though I felt bad for abandoning her? I was now the bad guy for not dropping everything to go home after not hearing from them for months. I searched through my old books for something I might have missed. However, nothing was present. Thanksgiving is not mentioned. You didn't say you wanted to come see me? I was more perplexed by this last-minute guilt trip than anything else. Later that night, I texted her to let her know that I would also be unable to attend Christmas. We planned to go on another excursion. She never responded when I said that I would love to catch up after the new year. I made an effort to be civil. The fact that a few days passed with no reaction was not shocking. I made an effort to get rid of the weird feeling that had entered my stomach, but it persisted. In hindsight, I think that phone conversation was only the beginning of something much bigger, something I hadn't anticipated. At that time, I had no idea how far this disaster would spread. I thought things would settle down after that odd Thanksgiving discussion, but my dad texted me a week or so later. I never get texts from my dad. He's more of a talk when necessary type of guy, let me tell you. I therefore thought there must be a severe issue when his name appeared on my phone. However, what I read when I opened the message seemed implausible. I genuinely burst out laughing. If you don't come home for Christmas, I'm cutting off your college payments. What exactly? I received my degree 3 years ago. No more college payments needed to be stopped. I tried to be lighthearted at first, thinking that perhaps he had confused me for one of my siblings or something. 3 years had passed with no payments. Check your bank account maybe? That, I thought, would be the final word. I reasoned that he would realize his mistake, laugh it off, and move on. Nevertheless, my phone buzzed again a few hours later. The message was longer this time around. Yes, my dad was very angry. He went on to talk about my selfishness, how I was abandoning the family, and how I didn't appreciate all the sacrifices my parents had made for me and my siblings. At this moment, I was just staring at my phone in amazement. I had never once made a request of them. To be honest, I was unaware that they believed they were covering my education expenses. All of my costs, including tuition, had been covered by Grandma. To be honest, I was relieved that she wanted my parents to be removed from that area of my life and out of the spotlight. My dad was trying to put me through this whole guilt trip, and it seemed completely unexpected. I'm sorry you feel that way, but Granny paid for my college. After the holidays, I'm glad to catch up, but I already have Christmas plans, I said after taking a big breath. I assumed that would end it, but it didn't, of course. Instead, he became more focused. He started talking about how the family was supporting me, how I was rejecting them, and how I didn't care about them twice. I was just done if I couldn't even try to spend the holidays at home. It seemed so absurd. When I moved out, people barely noticed that I had been living alone for years. Now, all of a sudden, I was abandoning the family, because I was not returning home for Christmas. The more I considered this, the more angry I got. I tried to brush it off and move on, but I couldn't help but notice how hypocritical it seemed. They hadn't inquired about my well-being, asked if I needed anything, or checked in on me for months. But I was supposed to drop everything and run when they asked for something. If not, it made no difference. I had the impression that I was merely a fallback option for them, someone they could depend on only when it was practical. I called Laura and Sophie to vent my frustration. As usual, they understood immediately. Laura said my parents probably just wanted to exploit me to boost their own self-esteem. She stated plainly, they don't really care if you're there. Sophie agreed with me. Screw them. They just want to feel like they've fulfilled their role as parents by getting you home for the holidays. You owe them nothing. That was it. It was just what I needed to hear. I owed them nothing. I made the decision to sleep on it that night before responding to my dad once more. I didn't want to make a mistaken statement. However, my phone buzzed once more as I laid there attempting to let it go. My dad sent me another stern message. If you don't come home, don't bother coming back at all. I froze as I gazed at the screen. It was like being punched in the stomach. How did we arrive here? From my own father essentially disowning me over Christmas, to hardly speaking to him? I wanted to react angrily, to confront him about all the times I felt invisible in that house and how they had ignored me. However, I decided not to respond. I laid over, put my phone down, and attempted to fall asleep. I had no intention of letting this derail my vacation plans. I received multiple more texts the following morning, this time from my mother. I couldn't help but giggle since they were more of the same, expressions of displeasure and perplexity over why I was being so detached. Separated? They were just now realizing that I had been aloof throughout my life. I ignored the books and focused on preparing for the ski trip. This had taken months of preparation, and Laura, Sophie, and I refused to let my parents bring me down with shame. We drove the following day, and I felt liberated for the first time in a long time. I wasn't feeling guilty about it, not with my parents in mind. I was content to spend time with the people who genuinely loved me. Naturally, though, things can't stay that way forever. My mother sent me another letter in the midst of my trip. Just when I thought I could relax. It had nothing to do with Christmas this time. If I don't come home soon, she added, they'll have to start making decisions about my future without me, which I don't enjoy. That's when it struck me. It had nothing to do with Christmas or the holidays, did it? They were planning something bigger, something much more. Maybe it was about my brother Mike, maybe about the house or the family finances. However, I was aware of one thing. They wanted me to be involved in whatever it was. Not because they were missing me. They needed me, for whatever reason. That was their insurance strategy. The realization came as a shock. All this time, I thought they were just trying to guilt trip me into a homecoming for Christmas. I was never personally concerned about it though. It was all about them. They cared because they wanted to spend time with me. They didn't care if I was present, and I refused to allow them to drag me back into their mess. After that, I stopped reading their messages. I made an effort to be in the moment and not think about what was waiting for me at home as I spent the remainder of the ski trip with Laura and Sophie. We drank too much hot chocolate, joked, and went skiing. It was just what I needed to re-energize. However, the peace would not endure. After the ski trip, I came home and made an effort to reorganize my routine. It felt good to be temporarily removed from all the family conflict, but I knew it would only last. Yes. My oldest brother Nick called me a few days later. It had been months, perhaps longer, since we had spoken. I therefore knew this would not be a casual talk when I saw his name on my phone. Nick was the one brother I ever thought would be sympathetic to me. I always believed that our relationship might have been better because he wasn't as ill as our other brothers. However, he was enmeshed in his own life, just like the rest of our family. When his name appeared, I paused. Curiosity won me over, even if I wanted to ignore it. Nick jumped right in before I could say hello. Mom and Dad have been talking about making you the legal guardian for Michael when they're gone. I sat there in shock for a moment. I felt like I was struck out cold by someone. Was this a prank of some sort? They had barely been in my life for years, and now they were going to force Michael's care on me. Throughout his life, Michael has spent time in and out of care facilities. What on earth? Finally, trying to maintain a calm tone, I asked, "What are you referring to?" My heart was pounding. Nick let out a sigh as if he were annoyed that I wasn't accepting this news with grace. You know the situation with Mom and Dad. They're not going to be around permanently, and they need someone to look after things when they go. I said in a trembling voice. And they consider someone to be me? After everything? After all the ignoring and guilt-tripping, they just believe I'll abandon my life and take up their mess? Nick didn't seem to get why I was offended. Look, you're the only one truly steady among the lot. The others have personal problems. You really have your life together. I almost burst out laughing. All together? What am I living? Yes, I had a solid job, a home, and I wasn't constantly in and out of hospitals, but it didn't mean I was prepared to care for someone, especially after years of treatment that was practically non-existent. Maybe you guys should have considered this before now, I said, growing increasingly irritated. They never bothered me about this. Nick came across as defensive. Like you said, as if everything was already decided behind your back. Until lately, I also knew neither. Still, I considered you should hear it from me before they tried to spring it on you. This has nothing to do with Christmas. Now, the scope of this went beyond a holiday. Michael's parents had big plans for him, and they hadn't even looked to see if I was prepared to take on that kind of responsibility. They just assumed I would. I said, what then? Am I meant to move back home, drop my entire life, and give up all I have worked for to take care of Michael? Nick had no answer for that. I didn't give a damn. I had been ignored my entire life because I wasn't causing trouble, despite his attempts to convey how hard things were for our parents and how they were balancing Michael's care. Problems. Since I wasn't crumbling like the others, I was destined to assume this massive responsibility. There was not enough fairness. I interrupted him in the middle and said, "I'm not doing it. I won't be their backup, not here." For a minute, Nick remained quiet. They didn't care about me for the last 25 years, and they don't deserve to make me answerable for anything now. He continued. "I get it. I do. Indeed. Still, you are a member of the family." I wanted to yell when I heard the word family. A family? Which family? The family that abandoned me while I was growing up? The family that only gets in touch with me when they need something? I did belong to the family, but only because it was convenient for them. I said, sounding resentful. They turned their backs on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. There was silence on the other end of the telephone. After letting out a sigh, Nick remarked, "I'll tell them." After hanging up, I sat there and stared at the wall while attempting to sort everything out. There was a part of me that wanted to shout, throw something, and release all the anger I had accumulated over the years. Nevertheless, I simply felt lethargic and, to be honest, exhausted. I completed their contingency plan. I was expected to step up when things become difficult, but I was done being invisible when it was convenient. I didn't hear from Nick or my parents for a few days. It was as if they were waiting for me to realize my mistake and become the good daughter they had suddenly decided I should be. Even if I changed my mind, I would not move. I got a letter in the mail one afternoon. I wasn't going to let them burden me with their problems because I had my own life. This was from my mother. She had sent a letter instead of calling, maybe in keeping with our 1800s lifestyle or something. The letter was lengthy and haphazard, and it contained the same guilt-tripping nonsense I had heard my entire life. She went on to talk about how much they relied on me, how hard their lives were, and how they weren't sure what to do if I weren't there. What really got me, though, was the letter's final line. "Emily, we are not asking for much," she wrote. That's when I realized. They weren't begging me to be a part of their everyday life or missing me. This had to do with their wish for someone to clean up their mess when they were gone. When the family was gone, someone was needed to fill in. It was convenience, not connection or love. They wanted to patch things up because I was the only one who wasn't crumbling. I ripped the letter to pieces and tossed it in the trash. When I folded up that letter from my mother, I felt like I had gone as far as I could. I'm finished. I had nothing else to say to them. After years of disregard and usage when it was convenient, they wanted me to take the burden? Of course not. That, I decided, was the end. I blocked their phones after throwing away the letter. It was not the end, of course. A knock on my door occurred a few weeks after I had blocked their numbers. Since it was a weekday, I didn't anticipate anyone. I thought it may be a delivery at first, but my mother was simply standing there when I unlocked the door. She stood on my front porch as if she had a lot of right to be there. I hesitated, unsure if I should slam the door in her face or listen to her. Her appearance had altered. Maybe she was older, maybe she was just more tired. She wasn't the same woman I'd known growing up, for whatever reason. I was unable to determine if it was the years, the stress, or another factor. I didn't feel sorry for her though, not after everything. I tried to speak steadily as I asked, "This is where you are working?" She took a while to respond. She just stood there, looking at me as if she had forgotten who I was. Finally, "We need to talk, Emily," she said. I let out a groan. "No, we truly do not. I have said all I need to say." She took a step forward as if she were going inside, but I remained motionless. I had made the decision to let her in, despite all the deceit and guilt trips. Knowing I wouldn't move, she paused and her voice grew softer. "Your father's condition is growing worse. He visits the hospital, in and out. We have no idea how long he has left, my Emily." I had no idea what to do. "Your father is dying." The card was the one she had been waiting to play. She didn't say anything direct, but I could tell what she was attempting to say. And see, I'm not ruthless. I didn't want my dad to suffer. However, I couldn't just abandon everything and rush to their side like a docile child after everything they had done to me. "I apologize," I responded, attempting to sound composed. "Still, this is not my issue. Years of figuring this out have gone between you and Dad. You cannot simply turn here right now and expect me to make everything right." She gave me the impression that I had struck her. "I'm not calling for your fixing of anything," she replied. "Simply put, I need you there for the family." Once more, that word. Family. I almost burst out laughing. Which family? The one who turned away from me 25 years ago? The one that only speaks with me when they need something? Mom, that family is not what we have. That's manipulation. I thought she was going to argue with me, but she just broke down in tears. My mother began crying on my doorstep, and I was at a loss for what to do. Furthermore, I couldn't just watch her cry. However, I had no intention of inviting her inside. "Look," I replied, lowering my voice despite myself. "I understand this presents challenges for you. I really do. I am not, however, your fallback option. I won't be the one to come and put things under control. You have to face the consequences of your decision." For a minute, I saw anger flicker over her face as she dried her tears and looked up at me. "Emily, we did the best we could. You are not aware of what it was like raising all of you and juggling everything. We were trying to keep everyone else alive. Hence, we ran out of time for you." I had heard the same explanation a million times before. I had a firm voice. I said, "And that's not my fault. You decided to bear 5 children. You decided to drop me behind and concentrate on everyone else. Not mine. That was your choice, and right now, you're attempting to shame me about it." "Mom, I am not going to do it." She looked at me for a long time, as if she had forgotten who I was. Maybe she still thought of me as the quiet student who never caused trouble and could be ignored because I didn't require her. However, that child had vanished. They couldn't use me to clean up their mess since I wasn't invisible. "Thus that's it?" she said in a cold tone. "You're just going to ignore us?" she finally questioned. I gave a headshake. "Not yes. Many years ago, you turned away from me. After that she remained silent. I'm just finally walking away." All she did was turn and go back to her car. I watched her leave while feeling a weird mixture of feelings. Of course, I was depressed, but I felt liberated most of the time. It seemed like I had finally let go of something that had been bothering me for years, something I should have let go of a long time ago. I went back inside and took a seat, attempting to organize things. I was no longer angry with her. I wasn't even injured. All I did was carried out. I had life to live, and I refused to allow them to drag me back into their mess despite the humiliation, the manipulation, and the constant feeling of inadequacy. There was silence for the following few weeks. No SMS, no calls, no mail. It seemed like a huge burden had been lifted off my shoulders, and they finally appeared to understand that I would not be coming back. I focused on my life, my career, and my friends. I didn't keep an eye on myself, anticipating the next guilt trip. I was defying established conventions. Their expectations were no longer a burden on me. After about a month, Nick sent me an email. It was only a few sentences long, but it covered everything I needed to know. "Last night Dad passed away. I'm not sure how to feel. I thought you ought to be aware." I spent a lot of time looking at the email. It wasn't shocking to me. This was headed my way, I knew. To be honest, I didn't feel depressed or anything else. Actually, I did nothing. I thought about answers for a while. I thought about calling Nick to see how he was doing and maybe even to offer my condolences. But then I realized that this was only another stage in the same cycle, another chance for them to pull me back in. And this time, I hadn't been duped. Without replying, I dismissed the email and continued with my day. I had finally come to terms with leaving their world. I was publicly humiliated by my family at my sister's lavish wedding. Am I the asshole for peeling back the mask of their ideal family? The crystal champagne flute trembled in my hand as I watched my sister Serafina glide down the altar. The frothy mixture of silk and lace she wore for her wedding was worth more than my annual salary. As soon as I noticed my mother's icy look from the front row, I knew. It was an error of mine to be here. The disappointment to the family, the uninvited sister, who dared to attend Serafina's ideal society wedding. I took a seat further back in the large ballroom. I hoped the gorgeous flower arrangements would shield me from more scathing glances. 2 rows up, a stage whisper echoed, "Can you believe she had the nerve to come?" After what happened at the clinic, I took hold of my husband Liam's hand. It was only his silent encouragement that kept me from fleeing. Our daughter, Maya, 6, fidgeted in her Sunday best, oblivious to the tension that flickered through the air like static before a storm. The wedding march was played by the string quartet. Both are picture perfect. Julian, Serafina's fiancé, was waiting for her at the altar. As he handed her over, the same father who informed me 10 years earlier that I was dead to him grinned, his pleasure beaming across the room. When Mother stood up, the officiant had hardly finished speaking. She glanced at the crowd, her high heels clicking on the marble. "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or permanently hold your peace," she stated. Then she looked directly at me and said, "I apologize, everyone." Years of social manipulation had sharpened her voice, and it echoed loudly in the still room. "But we have an uninvited guest who needs to leave. Ilara, you were explicitly told you were not welcome at family events. This is a private ceremony. 200 faces turned in my direction. Maya pulled away from me. Mommy, why is Grandma? Serafina's exquisitely manicured lips curled into an angry smile. Security, please escort my former sister out. She's trying to ruin my special day, as usual. Former sister? Maya's tiny voice broke. Nonetheless, Aunt Serafina. I'm not your aunt, dear, Serafina vehemently stated. Your mother betrayed us all, losing her right to call herself family years ago. Adjacent to our row, 2 security personnel emerged. Liam got up and stood between them and me, saying, We're leaving? No need for force. Mother's poisonous voice said, How dare you bring a child into this mess, Ilara? You haven't changed at all, trying to manipulate us with an innocent girl. My cheeks got hot as we went past bewildered guests. Maya trembled in my grasp. Like poison darts, the whispers followed us. Somebody said, Always was the troubled one. Such a shame what she did to her poor parents. That poor child, having her for a mother. I swung around and halted at the ballroom doors. Serafina stood triumphant at the altar with her mother and father at her sides like proud sentinels. With the exception of the black sheep daughter they killed, it was the perfect family scene. Congratulations, Serafina, I said loudly over the silence. I hope the basis of your marriage is more honest than that of your life. For a moment, her smile faltered. Excellent. I'll tell her what I know. In the lobby, Maya broke down in tears. Why don't they love us, Mommy? I embraced her while observing Liam's worried gaze across her head. He was aware of what this meant. My years of cautious composure were shattered. My hand was driven by their humiliation of me in front of my daughter. I stroked her hair and said, Some people, sweetheart, aren't capable of real love, my determination growing stronger with each sob. For 10 years, I've stayed away, swallowing their lies. 10 years of watching Serafina build her perfect life on stolen dreams and buried secrets. But seeing my daughter cry? That's the final straw. They want to talk about betrayal? Fine. Time to show them what real betrayal looks like. I have everything to prove and nothing left to lose. Go for it, my sister. Go for it. The drive home after Serafina's wedding seemed to go on forever. With tears still apparent on her cheeks, Maya had slept out in the back seat. The silence between us stretched like a rubber band on the verge of breaking, and Liam's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Finally, he muttered, You shouldn't have gone, in a quiet voice so Maya wouldn't wake up. We discussed this. Dozens of social media alerts about the tragedy flashed as I followed the edge of my phone's screen. They made my daughter weep, Liam. Our daughter. And whose fault is that? He replied, his jaw clenched. You knew exactly what would happen. He made a left turn toward us. You wanted it to happen, perhaps because there was truth in it. The charge was more painful than I thought it would be. Pull over, Liam. Pull over right now. He pulled the car into an empty lot. Moving between faded parking lines, I fled in search of air that was not dense and devoid of unsaid words. My sweaty skin felt frigid against the twilight air. Liam left the car running for Maya and followed. Talk to me. What's really going on? I sounded brittle when I laughed. Did you see her face? The way she looked at me? You never wanted to discuss it before. Perfect Serafina told everyone why I was disowned. You know what she told everyone about? The words had a vinegar-like flavor. She told them I stole from the clinic and embezzled money allocated for patient treatment. Anyway, she's working there right next to Father, probably. Liam was not an expert. I halted. Not right now. His expression was filled with worry as he approached nearer. Likely what? My phone buzzed, a message from an unidentified number. I understand exactly what happened 10 years ago. Meet me at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Coffee on Carson Street. Ilara. Liam's hand on my shoulder made me jump. What aren't you letting me know? I sent him the SMS message. His stance grew gloomy. Could be a trap. Your family may not be my family anymore. I turned to face the car again. Someone at the clinic knows something. Someone who was there when everything fell apart. He grabbed my arm and said, And you're just going to meet this mystery person? After what happened today? Think about Maya. About us. I said. I am thinking about us. As I stepped back a little. That's why I have to do this. They embarrassed our daughter Liam. Made her doubt everything about who she is. Who I am. Thus, this is about revenge? This is about truth. Through the car window, I saw Maya sleeping peacefully in spite of everything. Serafina built her whole life on lies. The clinic, her marriage to Julian, her reputation. They were all built on top of what she had stolen from me. I recognized the indication from our 10 years of marriage when Liam ran a hand through his hair. He was listening, but he was nervous. Exactly what are you hoping for? I firmly locked his eyes and said, nothing yet, but if someone's finally willing to talk. I need to know if you are really with me, not just standing on the sidelines while I fight this battle alone. He observed me quietly for a while before saying, you're different tonight. There's something in your eyes I haven't seen before. I moved closer and took his hands, saying, maybe because I finally see things clearly. Remember when we first met? You mentioned I was carrying too many ghosts. You were right. But Liam, they were monsters dressed in my family's faces, and I let them haunt me for too long. They were not ghosts. We were swept by the headlights of one car as it passed. Liam's face began to reflect understanding in that little moment. He hugged me tightly. He whispered, I'm with you. Into my hair. But we do this cleverly. We do this right. No more improvised confrontations. Agreed? I breathed in his familiar aroma, gaining strength from his solid presence. Coming with me tomorrow at the coffee shop? Watch from a distance, make sure it's not a setup. He pulled back and touched my face, saying, of course. But, Alara, promise me something. Always. We protect Maya first. Whatever we learn, whatever happens, always. Always, I said, although I was aware that sometimes defending oneself meant retaliating. Sometimes it entails destroying everything in order to use the ashes to construct something bigger. Maya shifted a little in the car, murmuring in sleep. I felt my will stiffen like titanium as I stared at her. Serafina and my parents thought they could make me look foolish again. Instead, they had provided me with just what I needed, a reason to quit running and start defending myself. My mysterious messenger appeared. I'll begin gathering the matches I need to light this whole facade tomorrow. Tomorrow. However, I would be cuddling my child tonight and reflecting on why the truth was more important than any easy lie. I discovered Ms. Chen, our family clinic's former accountant, hunched over a laptop in the corner of Carson Street Coffee, which was bustling with afternoon traffic. Liam caught my eye from his position at the counter and acknowledged in silence that he was watching. Opposite Ms. Chen, I sank onto the chair. Her fingers were a little unsteady as she closed her laptop. 10 years is a long time to stay quiet. I wasn't sure you would show up. I spoke in a neutral tone even though my heart was pounding. Where now? Uncomfortably, she looked around and distributed a USB disk. Your sister's wedding. It was all over social media. When I saw what they did to you, you ought to see something here. The drive felt very heavy in my hand. What's on it? Ms. Chen softened her voice and leaned forward. Financial records from before you left. Your father actively covered up massive ones. Your father didn't just frame you for embezzlement, Alara. I got my coffee. Ms. Chen stammered at Liam's presence because of his quiet manner of staying close. When he was gone, she went on. She stated, the patient passed away in 2013. Remember? How could I forget? After receiving experimental treatment, a patient with terminal cancer passed away. The inquiry exonerated the clinic. However, what about it? Serafina administered the wrong dosage. She wasn't qualified, hadn't even completed her medical training. The comments spoken by Ms. Chen were like physical blows. Your father buried it, paid off the family. He used the money he claimed you had taken. The coffee cup trembled on the saucer as I set it down. Do you have evidence? Everything's on that drive, including evidence that Serafina never finished medical school. The credentials her clinic uses are all falsified. My throat constricted. Why did you not step forward back then? Her face reddened with shame. Your father threatened my family. My daughter was sick. I needed the insurance. But she's grown now, and I noticed what happened at the wedding. The way they're still hurting you. My phone was buzzing from Serafina. Having coffee with anyone intriguing? I glare and catch a glimpse of Julian's automobile through the window as it drives off. They were watching me. With a hint of terror in her voice, Mrs. Chen knew this. I wouldn't have. I stood up, held out an arm, and said, it's okay. Let my husband drive you home. Liam arrived immediately and walked Mrs. Chen out after reading the situation. Just catching up with old friends. Married life, how is it? Is what I said to Serafina. She answered right away. Keep your distance from Mrs. Chen, there should be some stories buried. I snatched up the USB device and began thinking quickly. However, it was father who sent the following message. Your place of employment, 1 hour, come alone, Mrs. Chen loses everything. Something had altered, but it was obviously dangerous. The trembling in my hands was sudden anticipation instead of fear. I was stopped at the clinic by father's secretary, but I pushed by her and went into his office, where Serafina and he waited. Serafina said, "That was quick," but her usual haughtiness disappeared. I approached father across his desk and said, "Enough games. You want to threaten Mrs. Chen? Go ahead. First, explain something. How many other patients did Serafina kill?" He lost the color in his face. Serafina took a step. "You're talking about something else entirely." I took note of their answers. 2013. Terminal cancer patient. Wrong dosage. Ring any bells? "You've obviously lost your mind," remarked father. However, I interrupted him. "Funny thing about buried secrets, someone always keeps receipts." I grabbed my phone and listened to the recording of Mrs. Chen. Wonder what the medical board would find. For my phone, Serafina pressed forward. Her front fell apart as I sidestepped with ease. "You are bluffing. Try me." I turned to face father. "You destroyed my life to protect her. Framed me for theft. Erased me from the family. All to cover her mistakes." He spoke in a cold tone. "That which was required." Serafina had promise. "You were always difficult, complicated." I laughed, and the sound was so harsh that they both flinched. I was the only one speaking the truth. "Now I have evidence." "What do you want?" asked Serafina. I walked over to the door and put my hand on the handle before hesitating. I smiled this time as I saw decades of pain solidify into meaning. "Want? I want you both to know what's coming. Every lie, every cover-up, every patient you've put at risk, it all comes out. This time, I'm not the one that vanishes." I ignored their objections as they followed me out. I had enough facts in my pocket thanks to the USB drive to destroy their perfect world. Allow them to attempt to stop me. The young child I was? No longer scared. They should have been terrified of me. Financial documents, fictitious credentials, and patient records were among the contents that splattered onto my laptop screen from the USB stick. With every item, the evidence against my family grew stronger. As I answered an email thread from mother and father, my hands trembled. I turned the television to reveal Liam pacing our home office. "You need to see this," I murmured. His jaw locked, he leaned forward to glance over the files. To my own ears, my voice sounded distant. They knew about the other patients. 3 more deaths, all covered up, all credited to natural causes or equipment faults. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Julian's expensive car arrive into our driveway. I took Liam's arm as he approached the entrance. "Let me take care of this." The confident man from Serafina's marriage was nothing like Julian. His eyes were darkened by deep wrinkles, and his tie was untied. "We must chat, Alara." With a deliberate lack of offer, I led him to the kitchen. His wedding band was a toy. His eyes swept across my laptop. "Serafina told me what you had," he continued. "Whatever they're presenting to you, who's delivering what?" He ran a hand through his hair and replied, "The medical board investigators. They asked about disparities in Serafina's credentials yesterday." My heart raced, but my eyes remained unfocused. "I haven't contacted any investigators." He said, "Don't lie to me," in a voice that broke. He mumbled, "I know what she did. What they all did. I've been reviewing the clinic's records since the wedding and I can't. I have evidence too. Things even you don't know about. But if this gets out, it won't just destroy Serafina and your parents. Other good people are involved, just following orders." My phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "An anonymous complaint regarding probable maltreatment in your house just arrived at your daughter's school. CPS has been notified." Panic rose and the room swayed slightly. Julian saw how I responded. He whispered, "They're desperate. They will do anything to maintain this silence." Like pieces of ice, the words came out of me. "They're threatening my daughter." Julian replied as he leaned forward. "Let me help you. I can get you money, enough to disappear, start fresh somewhere else. Just hand over the evidence." There was Liam in the doorway. His manner stayed the same. Julian remarked, "I guess you should leave," as he stood up. "You don't understand. They'll fabricate evidence against you, Alara. Mark already called in favors with local authorities. They'll take Maya." "Get out," I said in the same tone. "Tell my sister and parents they just made their biggest mistake." After Julian went, I shook, but Liam held me, feeling determined instead of scared. He said, "We have to move quickly." "Should they be involving Maya?" "No." I turned aside as my ideas began to solidify into a new plan. "We're running. Call your sister at the newspaper. It's time everyone knew exactly who the Millers really are. My fingers raced across the screen, arriving at encrypted files that I had spent weeks gathering. Alara, they killed Mrs. Chen? They'll destroy us if we run, Liam replied. But they neglected something vital about cornered animals. What's that? I turned the screen in his direction and showed him the audio recordings, surveillance photos, and backup data from the parallel study I had been conducting with Mrs. Chen. Those fight hardest when they have nothing left to lose. I started sending emails to all of the major national news outlets. Mother wants to play games with her granddaughter's safety? Fine, let's see how she likes it when the whole world knows exactly what kind of monster she really is. According to Liam, this could backfire spectacularly. Probably, I said as I sent the emails and saw them disappear into the internet. But I'm done playing according to their rules. The first national news alert appeared on my phone a few minutes later. The dispute was recognized, and this time, my goal was to completely destroy them rather than just disclose the facts. The police arrived at 3 a.m. I started from the window of our bedroom as they took Liam away in handcuffs, their accusations of embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraud echoing through the quiet street. All made up, all carefully planned to ruin him. Thankfully, Maya slept through it. I watched her quiet breathing from her doorway, knowing that I was the cause of this. Later, a call from Father's number buzzed through my phone. His voice carried decades of trained dominance as he asked, "Are you satisfied? This is just the beginning, Alara. Walk away now or tomorrow." It's her school calling with concerns about her home life. Quietly, I ended the call. I packed Maya's favorite stuffed animal, clothes, and her favorite photo album in her overnight bag. I had trembling hands. Liam's sister Claire arrived precisely 1 hour later, looking scared and bewildered. "It's just for a few days. Like a holiday with Aunt Claire," I said to Maya as she woke up. "But what about Daddy? What about you?" I hugged her and breathed in her comforting aroma. "We'll fix everything, I promise." After they left, the house appeared to be a tomb. I poured myself a glass, but before I could take a swallow, the front door was pounded. Serafina stood on my doorstep, her face smudged with mascara. "They are going to kill you." "What?" She pushed by me while hastily examining doors and windows. "I overheard them speaking. Father hired someone. They're making it look like a break-in gone bad." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Mrs. Chen was my friend too," her voice cracked. "And I cannot have another death on my conscience." For the first time in years, I genuinely looked at my sister. The perfect facade had fallen apart, revealing a person who was equally damaged as I was. "Additionally, Julian left me," she added. She took hold of my arm. "The medical board revoked my license. Everything's falling apart, and they're just worried about protecting themselves like they always have. They're just worried about it. You have to run. Right now. Take what you can." The windows were brushed by headlights. Serafina stopped. "They're here," I told her to get out the back, as I was already making my way to my laptop. 2 minutes is all I need. "Alara, go." I instantly uploaded everything to several secure servers. The front door shattered beneath the weight of powerful boots as she vanished. 2 males came in with their faces turned away. Expert. Clinical. I knew the expression, the same cold efficiency Father always praised in his business dealings. "This can be easy or difficult, Mrs. Collins," the taller guy replied kindly. As they came closer, I looked aside and bought seconds. "My father sends his greetings. The Millers send their sympathies over your terrible accident." A clicking sound caused them to turn. Serafina held her phone while she stood there. She declared, "I live stream everything?" The men looked at each other. At that moment, I sprang toward the front door, but the shorter one grabbed me. My face erupted in pain as he hit me. I observed Serafina walk toward the man through blurry vision. "Run," she cried out loud. I staggered onto the street with blood in my mouth. My ears are ringing. Behind me, glass broke. I couldn't tell if it belonged to her or to me. She let out another scream. The lights flashed on in the dwellings of the neighbors. An automobile engine roared to life somewhere. Professional to the last, the men left my residence and made their way gently to their car. Serafina was asleep in the kitchen, her phone crushed close by. But she was breathing, and when sirens screamed in the distance, she started to stir. With a whisper. "Did you get it?" she said. "The evidence?" "Yes." As she sat up, I pointed out the bruises that were already starting to form. I questioned. "Why did you come back?" She caressed her injured lip lightly and said, "Because I remember. Before they turned us against each other, I remember when you were my big sister, And I missed that person. The sirens approached. Soon there would be questions, remarks, and more lies from parents. Liam remained in prison. Maya had left. Everything I had constructed was in ruins all around me. However, what older sister Serafina said struck a chord with me. I felt something, not forgiveness yet, not at all. Nevertheless, it touched something deep to know that we had both been manipulated by our parents and turned against one another for their own purposes. I said, "We have to end this." As my kitchen walls were illuminated with red and blue lights. Not just expose them, destroy them. Totally. As Serafina gazed at me, I saw my sister instead of my enemy for the first time in decades. I took hold of her hand and we both felt the weight of our own wounds and our shared tragedies. We were like that, bloodied but unbowed, when the police showed in the following day. Finally, together against the real demons in our story. Assume our parents would prevail. Their darkest horror was going to turn into their ideal family fantasy. The Miller Family Clinic's annual charity banquet served as our battleground. Serafina and I watched our parents work the room separately, acting as though nothing was wrong and that they hadn't attempted to have me killed the previous week. Mrs. Collins, one of the board members, touched my arm. "Surprised to see you here, given the circumstances." Using Mother's perfect social mask, I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. Father reached for the podium across the room. "Welcome everyone. Tonight, we honor 30 years of serving our community." Serafina indicated that everything was prepared from near the AV stand. I reached for my phone. Liam's attorney had confirmed that Father's accounts offered concrete evidence of financial malfeasance and that the charges against him had been dropped. "I'd like to share a video highlighting our clinic's achievements," Father added. Instead of the planned presentation, security footage took the stage as the lighting grew darker. Father, counting money at his job. Mother, threatening to alter patient records with Mrs. Chen. Each clip was completely damning, dated, and recorded. Shock rippled through the room as the audience gasped. Even though Father fumbled with the microphone, his voice was overpowered by the sound of him giving the command to beat me. Mother screamed, "Turn it off!" But Serafina held the door of the AV booth closed. I moved forward, my words echoing over the stunned silence. 30 years of fraud, corruption, and murder. Is this what we're celebrating? "Security!" shouted Father, but the hired officers remained still. They were working for me tonight. I took a step toward the podium. "Just like the private investigators watching you, the forensic accountants tracking your bribes, and the lawyers building cases for every family you've destroyed." Mother's cool head broke as she lunged at me. "You unappreciative," Serafina replied. "Careful, Mother," as she appeared from the throng. "The press is recording this right now." As invited anonymous reporters recorded every remark and every scene, cameras did indeed flash. Father's face twisted in rage as he asked, You planned this together? My own daughters?" "Your daughters," I said, my laughter piercing like shattered glass. "Everything I did was to protect this family," he growled. "You tried to kill me. Last week, you framed my husband, you threatened my child." With brutally digging fingers, he seized my arm. "Let her go," said Serafina in a firm, steely voice. "Or I tell them about Jason." Dad froze. The mother said, "What?" "The patient from 2011, Serafina replied, purposefully staring at him. "Except it wasn't the equipment, was it? It was you, trying to cover up a mistake that would have cost you everything. You blamed equipment failure." "You knew?" Mother said in a shaky voice. Serafina answered. "I found the actual records." With a little tremble in her voice. "You never protected me because you loved me. You did it because you needed someone under your control. The ones you kept to blackmail the manufacturer realized that too." This time, actual policemen entered the ballroom. Father shoved me away as he saw them and ran for the door. Julian, my surprise ally, tripped him before he had taken 3 steps. The chamber reverberated with the sound of shackles snapping into place as Father lay splayed on the marble floor. As Mother fought her own arrest, shouting a long list of denials and obscenities, the investigator started, "Mark Miller, you are under arrest." He then read him his rights. "You're charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud." I wasn't listening though. I saw as their masks were irreparably broken and their utopia crumbled. My arm slid across Serafina's. "You're free now," she remarked quietly. I continued to yell against unappreciative kids as I watched Mother being hauled away. However, I had a strange weight lift, a future emerging in which I was no longer under their control. I suffocated by the way my girlfriend turns everyday life into a fairy tale. How can I tell her the truth without breaking her heart? Throwaway because my main topic can be connected to my girlfriend's blog. I have been with my girlfriend for about 5 months. We've been casual friends since college, but only began dating after she graduated. We get along really well. When I say princess syndrome, I don't mean that she is spoiled or entitled, because she isn't. Her clothes seem to take over her life. She dresses like a sort of fairy tale princess on a near daily basis, excluding at work. Long, frilly skirts, lacy blouses, things like that. It works for her because she is very pretty and can pull it off. At first I found it to be very endearing, but then I became aware of how much time she spends on her outfits. She runs a blog that has a sizable amount of followers, and she is constantly posting outfit pictures, links to clothing items, and whatnot. She spends a few hours a day on her blog, at least. Then she spends time sewing items for new outfits or for her Etsy store. When we go out, we get a lot of stares at what she's wearing. I've also caught people sneaking pictures of her on their cell phones. This attention makes me uncomfortable. I have asked her to tone it down a bit, but she took that to mean not wearing anything in her hair when we're out together. I have told her several times that I love her just the way she is, but she seems to brush it off. I had hoped when she started her new job in the career of her choice that she would become more serious, but her new boss and coworkers encouraged her. I worry that people won't take her seriously, or miss how kind and intelligent she is. How can I talk to her about dressing more appropriately without hurting her feelings? Update 1. Too long, didn't read, girlfriend dresses like a princess? How do I talk to her about it? Relevant comments. Commenter, sounds like you have to get over your insecurities. This is her hobby, her interest, and she's getting positive reactions. You shouldn't be trying to change her, especially when it was something that initially drew you to her. Ope. I guess I'm having trouble seeing clothing as a hobby. I play video games as a hobby, but that doesn't cause strangers to take pictures of me when I'm trying to shop at the supermarket. I get your point that it initially drew me to her, because it did. That's fair. I guess I didn't think that it would be such a constant thing in her life, especially after she graduated. Commenter. So, you love her just the way she is, but you're assuming she'll take that to mean she should change how she is? That doesn't make sense. This is how she is. She enjoys dressing up like this. Shit, she posts outfit photos online because she enjoys it so much. Other people encourage her because they do like how she is. If you don't like the attention, ask her sometime to just go out with you while she's wearing a casual outfit, but keep in mind that she already loves what she's normally wearing. Oop, this is my problem. How do I ask her to dress more casually around me without her misinterpreting what I mean again, and also not hurting her feelings? I can think of ways to say one half of that, but it doesn't work with the other half. Commenter. If you love her the way she is, why do you want her to change? Just curious. Ope. She doesn't need all the frilly stuff, she'd still look like a princess. And it's one thing for an artsy college student to dress alternatively, but she's a 23-year-old woman now. I feel like her clothing masks how smart she is and makes her appear shallow. Is it for attention? I do think it's an attention thing. She says she doesn't care about what people think about her, but she spends so much time on her blog, replying to comments and such, I kind of doubt it. She also has told me that she loves being approached by little girls while she's dressed up, which definitely makes me think it's about attention. She doesn't dress inappropriately by those standards, she is well groomed and doesn't show much skin. But is it appropriate to wear lacy dresses and flower crowns to the supermarket? Again, it attracts unnecessary attention. Update 2. I didn't plan on updating, but things changed. I realized from my last post that I needed to be more supportive, but also communicate on how she could dress down on certain occasions so we could both be comfortable. Well, I never got a chance to talk to her about it. Last week she called and wanted to stop by my apartment after work. When she got there I offered to make dinner, but she said she couldn't stay and we had to talk. I jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me, and she looked really guilty. You can see where this is going. We talked about how we were in different places in life and had different goals for the future. Well, she talked, but I agreed. It was a pretty amicable breakup, even though I felt blindsided. We agreed to stay friends. I've never been dumped before, and it's fucking awful. I'm having trouble with the whole social media thing post-breakup. I want a way to keep in touch with her, but as soon as her relationship status changed, all these alternative-looking guys have been liking her posts and commenting on her pictures. I don't think she's seeing these guys, but it still hurts. My friend wants to set me up on a date, but I don't know if it's a good idea. Relevant comments. Commenter. Fickle is the head that wears the flowered lace crown. It was never going to work out anyway. You had some laughs and some good times, enjoy that and move on. OP. I understood some of her reasoning. Mainly, I want to move out of the city once my lease is up, and I wanted her to move in with me. I was worried about the long distance. She didn't want to leave the city, though. She said something about me being controlling too, but I don't think that's the case at all. Block her. We agreed to stay friends, so I don't want to block her. Update 3. 9 years, 8 months later, I was going through an old email and found this account again. I was surprised I could still log in, and even more by the amount of people who had reached out to me. It's a bit embarrassing to relive this breakup from almost 10 years ago. In retrospect, it wasn't meant to be, and I think I was reeling more from getting dumped than the loss of the relationship. I am 33 now and married to a wonderful woman, 31 female, for 4 years. I learned my lesson about supporting my significant other's hobbies. My wife loves running and baking. We have a daughter who is turning 3 this year. I want her to be free to express herself how she likes, as long as it is safe, of course. I would do anything for them. I am still friends with my ex-boyfriend on social media. We don't talk but we'll like each other's posts. She is married to another woman now who also dresses differently. It's not as frilly as she used to dress, but still unusual. Her pictures look like something out of Anne of Green Gables. She seems very happy on their farm together. Too long, didn't read, was dumb in my early 20s. Got over an old breakup and now I am married and happily supporting my wife's hobbies. Relevant comment. Commenter. Can we expect an update in 10 years when your daughter has become a teenager and developed princess syndrome? Also, congratulations on your life. Oop. Well, she does love pink and purple. My wife's affair was exposed by her own parents. Now they want to disown her and leave me their $2 million inheritance. Should I accept it? My wife, Nicole, 27F, and I, 29M, had been married for a year before I filed for divorce after discovering she was cheating on me with one of her coworkers. Interestingly, it was my in-laws that revealed the affair to me and advised me to file for divorce as soon as possible. Nicole is the sole child of her rich parents, who run a large pharmaceutical firm. Nicole and I met on a dating service around 3 years ago and hit it off on our first date. After 1 year of living together, I proposed, and we married shortly thereafter. Her parents, whom I'll call Frank and Leah, were always quite nice and seemed to like me. Nicole always joked that I was the son they never had, and it truly seemed that way. They treated me like family from the moment I met them. They were warm, friendly, and grounded despite their affluence, which I greatly respected. I grew up in an emotionally unstable home. My parents did not love each other, but stayed together for my sake, resulting in regular arguments. Neither were affectionate, and while we are still in touch, family dinners feel more like chores. But Nicole's family was different. They felt like my own people, and I instantly relaxed around them. While I knew they liked me, I never dreamed they would support me over their daughter. My difficulty now is that Frank and Leah want to make me the successor to their inheritance as a result of Nicole's adultery. They want to compensate for what happened by paying me $2 million, while disowning Nicole in the process. I'm not sure if I should accept it because, in the end, the money is rightfully Nicole's, and I'm only being offered it because of her betrayal. Nicole is outraged at the scenario, and I am emotionally heartbroken. I had a lawyer look over everything, and it's a substantial sum of money that I would be taking away from Nicole if I accepted their offer. Despite how hurt I feel, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate thing to do. I obviously want the money, but I am conflicted. Nicole and I have always had a smooth and loving connection. We had little fights, as any couple would, but we worked them out. So when my in-laws invited me over to their house to talk about something important, I had no idea they'd reveal Nicole's infidelity. Nicole works for her father's company and is in charge of recruitment. Because it was a family business, they could easily keep an eye on her and observed she was spending a lot of time with one of the new hires. What made it even more horrible was that the man she was having an affair with was much younger than her. He had recently graduated from college and he was just 21. It was legal, but it seemed unusual that Nicole, although being happily married, felt compelled to pursue love outside of our marriage. Her parents had seen the growing intimacy between the two of them and even asked Nicole about it to be sure. She assured them that they were just close friends and that nothing untoward was happening. This worried her parents, not only because it would have an impact on our marriage, but also because it could lead to legal action. Nicole was in a higher position than the guy she was associated with, and if things went wrong, he could use it against the company and sue them. Despite her parents' persistent questions about their relationship, Nicole argued that it was entirely professional and that there was nothing else to it. Unfortunately, her parents found it difficult to trust her. Despite their cautions, Nicole continued to see him outside of work. They initially refused to notify me because they did not believe it was their responsibility. It was plausible that this was a harmless friendship. However, things escalated, prompting her parents to intercede. They hired a private detective to keep tabs on Nicole. They had no money issues and were able to hire a professional for the work. The detective discovered that Nicole was frequently visiting the other person after work hours. She would tell me she was with friends or at work, and I believed her, but her parents later disclosed that this was not the truth. Every day, once her workday finished, she would go over to his house and spend a few hours before returning home. We all knew that if she was lying to me, something was wrong. When I found out, I was devastated. I sincerely loved Nicole, and a part of me still does, but finding that she had been cheating and lying for months devastated me. This news came about a week and a half ago, and I still remember how upset I was during the meeting with my in-laws. They too were very saddened when they told me the truth, knowing Nicole would never confess. They believed it was best for them to come forward. Nicole had no notion her parents knew the truth. I was the first one they informed. I cried down in front of them, but they consoled me as if I were their own kid. They reassured me that it was not my fault and that they had seen how effectively I handled Nicole. This was completely her doing. She didn't appreciate the love she received from her parents and me and tossed it all away for someone she'd only known for a year. I stayed at their house that night because I couldn't bring myself to go home and confront Nicole. They kindly let me spend the night, and I cried the whole time. I was rattled up and unsure of what to do next. Logically, I understood the next step was to file for divorce, but my heart wasn't ready to give up on her just yet. The following morning, I decided to return home before Nicole went to work. I hadn't returned any of her calls or texts the night before, so she was astonished when I walked up just as she was ready to leave. I was plainly in horrible shape and she was concerned. I sat her down and asked her about the affair, as it was the most pressing issue on my mind. She hesitated and attempted to dispute it at first, but then I showed her the photos her parents had given me, shots showing her car parked outside her co-worker's house on the night she had told me she was working late. She tried to say they were just pals hanging around, but there was no reason for her to lie. Eventually, she was forced to reveal the truth. She had been cheating on me. I broke down as soon as she admitted. This time it was worse than previously since, when it was only her parents informing me, I still hoped it was a misunderstanding. Hearing that from Nicole herself shattered any denial I had. I was hysterical, and while I don't remember all I said, I do recall there was a lot of screaming and shouting. Nicole began to cry, confessing that she had been silly and lost sight of what was important since she had grown bored in our marriage. She stated that the affair meant little to her and that she never expected me to find out. It simply made matters worse. If it didn't mean anything, she had no reason to do it. I was shocked to learn that she had wrecked our marriage because she was bored. I recall yelling at her about how much I trusted her, how I had always been there for her, and how she had given it all up for someone she hardly knew. I yelled until she collapsed into a pool of tears. At one point, things became so severe that she collapsed on the floor, wailing with her head in her hands, while I screamed. It was a disaster, and just thinking about it makes me uneasy. Nothing about it seemed normal. When the ordeal ended, I informed her I was done and asked her to leave the house. She begged with me, claiming she would cease things with the other guy immediately and wanted another chance at our marriage. I informed her that as long as she was around, all I could think about was her affair. I needed time to comprehend things, which meant she needed to leave. More disagreements ensued, with her claiming that we could work things out and that remaining together was the proper thing to do. At the time, I was still battling to understand that she had cheated on me. The decision to work things out or leave her was secondary. First, I wanted to digest what had happened, something I couldn't do with her around. I didn't want to breathe the same air as her because she repulsed and irritated me so much. However, she refused to leave, which infuriated me to the point that I informed her I would leave instead. I couldn't take being near her anymore. She was still unhappy and told me I couldn't go because she wanted to work things out and stay married. She claimed it was all a mistake and I couldn't leave her for something like this. I didn't even respond, just left. I didn't bother packing anything and instead began driving aimlessly, unsure where to go. I didn't realize I'd have to stay there overnight until I ran out of gas. I drove to the nearest motel and have stayed there ever since. Despite my best efforts to forgive and forget what Nicole did, our relationship has not improved. I simply can't. So last week, after 3 days of deliberation, I filed for divorce. I hadn't spoken to Nicole since leaving the house, despite her attempts to contact me. The reality is, I have nothing else to say to her since what she did is something I can never forgive or forget. However, my in-laws have been in close communication with me, checking in on me on a daily basis to ensure my well-being. I've been talking to them since when I asked my own parents for aid. They weren't very helpful. They gave non-specific suggestions, such as do what feels right, which was neither comfortable nor useful. Feeling emotionally separated from my parents, I confided in my in-laws. I haven't told my pals yet, but I do need emotional support, which is why I've stayed close to them. Some people may find it unusual, but I'm extremely close to them and don't believe it's wrong. Nicole began messaging me more frequently after being served with the divorce papers, but I have yet to read any of her texts. I silenced her alerts so they wouldn't annoy me, but that doesn't mean I'd moved on. Everything still hurts. To make matters worse, I am also struggling at work. I had to take an unexplained leave of absence since I was unable to commute from the hotel, which is in the middle of nowhere. I am almost out of paid leave, and my employer recently called me to inform me that if I do not return to work soon, I will be terminated. This added to my worry because I have huge bills coming up. Divorce is expensive and I'll need to start looking for a new home to live. I had been discussing all of this with my in-laws in conversation, expecting little support. But they shocked me. They told me that Nicole had put me in this situation, and they would rectify it. I had no idea what they were going to do, but a few hours later, they requested me to come to their house right away. Nicole was present and they wanted us to sort things out, not necessarily about the divorce, but at least about who would reside in the house. They proposed Nicole stay with them, while I required the house to keep my work. I was hesitant to go because I did not want to confront Nicole, but my in-laws persuaded me, and I eventually accepted. When I arrived at their house, I was frightened to meet Nicole after such a long time, but I tried not to let it show. For the first several minutes, we avoided looking at each other. We didn't notice each other's existence until my in-laws began conversing. My in-laws offered that I take over the house so Nicole could live with them, which made sense given that they all worked in the same place. Losing the house would be a significant issue for me because it would mean losing my work without a solid place to live. Then, something unexpected occurred. Nicole began protesting that she did not see why she had to be the one to make such sacrifices. She said it was my fault we were divorcing and informed her parents that they, as her parents, should be on her side rather than mine. She accused them of supporting a cheater, which baffled us all. We stared at her, waiting for her to clarify what she was saying. Her tone was furious and full of conviction, and I began to believe she might have something to say that made sense. Unfortunately, she began spewing total rubbish, and I immediately knew she was just trying to make me look terrible in front of her parents so they wouldn't support me again. Nicole had no idea her parents had told me about the affair, so she probably assumed I had hired an investigator to collect those images myself. Nicole, completely oblivious of her parents' involvement, began fabricating a story, alleging that I was having an affair with a mutual friend. She stated she had noticed how cozy the two of us were whenever we hung together, and she even supplied manipulated images to make it appear as if I was romantically involved with my friend. Nicole stated that her own affair occurred because she was hurt after discovering my alleged adultery, and that she only went out with her coworker as a form of revenge. She explained to her parents that now that everything was out in the open, she expected them to kick me out of the house and cut relations with me. She insisted that they discontinue their friendship with me because she was convinced I had duped them into thinking I was the victim. Nicole also accused me of planning the meeting with her parents in order to portray myself as innocent and place all of the responsibility on her. At that point, I knew Nicole had made a serious mistake. She had just dug herself a hole with her lies, hoping to expose me and regain her parents' support. Given the circumstances, that was an extremely poor decision. Sure enough, her mother began ranting at her almost immediately, claiming she couldn't believe Nicole believed they'd fall for her falsehoods and badly altered images. Nicole was visibly moved by her mother's reaction, as she had clearly not expected it. Her parents indicated that they had expected her to be honest after being caught, but she had instead become a lying cheater. They even apologized, claiming that they had failed to raise her correctly if she had become this person. Then came the big reveal. My in-laws revealed to Nicole that they had informed me about her affair and handed me the images. There was no point in lying anymore because everyone knew the truth. Nicole's expression at that moment was priceless. A massive battle erupted, which was unavoidable. Nicole felt betrayed and despised the fact that her parents had always treated me as if I were their own son while willing to sell off their own daughter for my sake. Her parents, understandably outraged, called her stupid for not realizing sooner that they were the ones who informed me about the affair. After all, they had asked her about it several times, asking if she had a relationship with her coworker, which she had continuously denied. Nicole said that it had crossed her mind that her parents might have notified me, but she disregarded the possibility, feeling that as her parents, they would show her loyalty regardless of what she did. The dispute lasted a bit before Nicole rushed out, claiming she didn't want to speak to any of us anymore. She stormed out, plainly agitated because she'd had enough of everyone. I felt sorry for her because I could imagine how difficult it must be not to have your own parents on your side. After things had settled down, my in-laws informed me that they had made up their minds. They intended to modify their will and make me the sole successor to their inheritance, believing Nicole did not deserve it and that I was a better choice. It was a big decision, and I was hesitant to accept such a significant quantity of money knowing that it would essentially be stolen from Nicole. I told them I needed some time to think it over because it was a huge deal and I couldn't just agree without thinking about the repercussions. I wanted to make sure I was making the proper decision, so I requested time, and they obliged. They promised me that I would have plenty of time to make my decision. It's been a few days, and I'm still unclear whether it's the moral and ethical thing to do. While Nicole did break our marriage by infidelity, the amount I would inherit from her is significant, and I am not sure if it is fair. I've been thinking about it and am at a loss. That is why I am here. To determine whether it is okay for me to accept my cheating soon-to-be ex-wife's $2 million inheritance. Update 1. Thank you for your helpful feedback and support. I'm doing well emotionally, thanks to God. I've also talked to my friends about it, and they believe I should accept the money. After all, Nicole messed up, and if her parents want to make up by leaving me the money, I should let them. My buddies reminded me that Nicole not only cheated, but she also used false images to make it appear as if I was the one cheating. Her parents might have believed her if they hadn't already learned the truth. Nicole was ready to go to such efforts to avoid culpability, so I have no need to feel terrible about accepting the inheritance. I have made up my mind that I will not reject it. Nicole didn't care about my sentiments when she was out there destroying our marriage for a guy she barely knew. If she is going to be angry with anyone, it should be her parents, not me. Update 2. Today, I contacted my in-laws and informed them that I was willing to accept their offer. They were overjoyed and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to make things right following Nicole's actions. They informed me that Nicole had ceased contact with them and blocked them on all platforms following our argument at their place. She had also submitted her 2-week notice and quit her work, as had her affair partner. I was shocked. I knew Nicole enjoyed her profession, and I suspected her father was grooming her to take over when he retired. Now he must find someone else. Nicole is clearly eager to give up everything because she refuses to accept responsibility for her own acts. My father-in-law's voice seemed disappointed. Despite Nicole's mistakes, she remains their daughter and only child. It fascinated me that my in-laws emphasized doing the right thing over catering to their daughter's desires, which very few parents would do. I attempted to console them, but words weren't enough, so I decided to go see them tomorrow and spend some time with them. I know they must be lonely and hurt. Update 3. I've been staying in a motel for a few weeks now, after leaving my residence. Unfortunately, I was dismissed from my work, but the good news is that my father-in-law spoke with a friend and found me a far better job at his buddy's company. So I guess it's all okay in the end. The divorce proceedings have begun, and Nicole and I are pretty tense whenever we meet with the mediator. It's difficult for me to ignore her, but I need to. Nicole has already started dating and moved in with the other guy, which I know for a fact. I'm not shocked, but I am rather disappointed. I expected her to take longer to move on from me given how long we had been together. But it plainly didn't mean much to her, and I'm now trying to make sure it doesn't mean anything to me either. However, things with my in-laws are going well. We no longer speak to Nicole, nor does she speak to us. We try not to bring her up because it's a delicate subject for all of us. It's sad, but at least we're a family now. My in-laws haven't amended their will yet, but they intend to do so when the divorce is finalized, and they'll make sure Nicole isn't aware until after they're gone. We try to meet up frequently because we know we're all going through the same thing and can help each other. I hope it improves over time, and maybe someday it will. My sister-in-law faked car accident injuries to manipulate my husband, but I caught her on camera. Now she's in jail for fraud. I never expected to be spilling my heart out on Reddit, yet here I am, desperate for advice and support. I'm Nancy, 28F, and I'm currently dealing with my husband's family, notably his sister Jenny, 32F. Jenny and I have always had a rocky relationship, but recent events have pushed things to breaking point. To provide some context, I met my husband Warren, 30M, at a mutual friend's Halloween party 5 years ago. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was dressed as Wonder Woman, and he arrived as Clark Kent. We spent the entire night conversing in a secluded nook, ignoring the craziness of the party around us. We hit it off right away, bonding over our mutual love of hiking, photography, and 1980s movies. I had never felt such an instant connection with anyone before. We chose to marry after 2 years of dating, which included weekend escapades, nice movie nights, and the occasional disagreement, typically about Warren's habit of leaving his socks everywhere. Our wedding was a small, personal celebration in a rustic barn, attended by close friends and family. That was when I first met Jenny. Jenny made it apparent from the moment we met that she did not like me. She arrived late for the rehearsal dinner in a white outfit that looked strangely bridal. During her toast, she spent more time reminiscing about her childhood memories with Warren than wishing us success in our marriage. She even accidentally poured red wine over my outfit during the reception. At the time, I put it down to wedding day stress and attempted to dismiss it. Jenny's behavior intensified over the months. She would make disparaging remarks about my work as a freelance graphic designer, hinting that I was not talented enough for her brother. "Oh, you're still doing that little drawing thing?" she'd ask with a condescending smile. "I thought you'd have found a real job by now." Each comment seemed like a small knife, eroding away at my self-esteem. Warren is from a close-knit family, and he has always been protective of Jenny. Jenny's parents died in a vehicle accident when she was 18, leaving her to raise Warren alone. She put her goal of becoming a nurse on hold in order to support her family with 2 jobs. I understand and admire their bond, but Jenny uses it to control Warren and disrupt our relationship. The first serious incident happened on our first wedding anniversary. Warren and I had planned a weekend retreat to a quiet mountain chalet, where we had spent our first trip together. I had been looking forward to it for months, planned hikes, picnics, and even a surprise candlelight dinner beneath the stars. Jenny called Warren in tears 2 days before we were about to depart, saying she was going through a difficult breakup and needed her brother's support. Warren, being the compassionate guy he is, proposed that we postpone our trip to be present for Jenny. I was disappointed, but I understood the circumstances. After all, family comes first, right? However, when we got to Jenny's house, we discovered her laughing and drinking wine with her friends. There were no signs of a split or sorrow. When I asked her about it later, she dismissed it, claiming she was simply feeling low and needed some companionship. "You wouldn't understand, Nancy," she murmured patronizingly, patting my arm. "Warren and I share a special bond. Sometimes I just want my lil' brother around." Warren saw nothing wrong with it, but I couldn't resist the suspicion that Jenny had purposefully thwarted our intentions. Jenny's intrusion into our life increased in frequency and severity over time. She would pop up unexpectedly to our place, usually on date nights or when Warren and I had scheduled some quality time together. She once interrupted a romantic supper that I had spent hours preparing. "Oh, did I interrupt something?" she inquired innocently, before settling into our couch and putting on the television. She would phone Warren at weird hours, claiming to have various emergencies that always seemed to be resolved by the time we arrived. One night, at 2 a.m., she called to report a gas leak in her apartment. We rushed over, only to find her quietly watching a movie, saying the scent had vanished just before we arrived. The problem came to a climax last month at Warren's 30th birthday celebration. I had spent weeks preparing a surprise party for all of Warren's friends and colleagues. I even managed to fly in his best friend from college, Mike, whom he hadn't seen in years due to their locations on separate coasts. The celebration was in full swing, with everyone enjoying the catered cuisine, open bar, and the presentation of Warren's life that I had painstakingly created. Jenny arrived an hour late, crashing into the living room while evidently intoxicated. She was holding a large gift box covered in glittering gold paper, and she proudly stated that she had the nicest present for her newborn brother. The room went silent as she demanded everyone's attention. The box contained a set of keys. Jenny proudly announced that she had purchased Warren a classic car he had long desired, a 1967 Chevrolet Impala, the very kind his father used to drive. I felt my heart fall. My own gift, a homemade picture album recording our relationship and a weekend vacation to his favorite camping spot, fell short in contrast. The room fell silent as all eyes went to Warren. I could see the conflict on his face. He was definitely moved by the gesture, but he was also concerned by the gift's extravagant nature. "Jen," he continued quietly, "this is too much. How did you afford this?" But what occurred next really stunned me. Jenny looked at me triumphantly and said, "See, this is how you show love, not with some cheap crafts and a trip to the woods." Her words struck deep, and I felt embarrassed in front of all of our guests. The room became uncomfortably quiet, and our friends shifted nervously, unsure where to look. Warren eventually spoke up, his voice strained with rage. "Jenny, that is enough. Your actions are improper and you should go." Jenny's face was distorted with wrath. She threw the keys at Warren's chest before stumbling towards me, pointing an accusatory finger. "You," she muttered, "have turned him against me. You are ruining our family." She stormed out, knocking over a vase of flowers and slammed the door so hard that a picture fell from the wall. The gathering soon dispersed after that, with guests making embarrassing excuses to go early. I was left standing in our living room, surrounded by half-finished food and deflated balloons, feeling completely dejected. Warren and I had a long, emotional chat late into the night after everyone else had left. He apologized for not standing up to Jenny sooner and pledged to establish clearer limits with her. We agreed that Jenny's behavior was harmful and that we needed to minimize our interactions with her for the sake of our marriage. But as I looked into Warren's eyes, I could sense the sorrow and turmoil. How could I ask him to choose between his wife and his sister, who had given so much for him? The next day, Warren called Jenny to discuss what had transpired. He informed her that her acts were inappropriate and that she needed to apologize to me if she wanted to remain a part of our life. Jenny refused, claiming she had done nothing wrong and that I was causing difficulties in their family. "I'm the only real family you have left, Warren," she added, her voice full with sorrow. "Don't let her take that away from you. We've reached an impasse. Warren is caught between his feelings for me and his commitment to his sister. I don't want to force him to make a decision, but I can't keep living with the continual stress and drama. I'm thinking about suggesting that we move to a different city to get some distance, but I'm concerned about Warren's reaction. Will he consider it an ultimatum? Will this merely bring him closer to Jenny? I adore my husband and want to make our marriage work, but I'm beginning to worry if it's feasible with Jenny's frequent intervention. Am I overreacting? Should I work harder to reconcile with Jenny for Warren's sake, or should I take more drastic measures to protect our relationship? Any advice is much appreciated. I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of family drama, and I'm not sure how to get back to shore. Update. It has been almost a month since my original post, and I wanted to provide an update on Jenny's situation. A lot has happened, and I'm still trying to digest it all. Thank you to everyone who gave me advice and support. It helped me get through this difficult period. Following my previous essay, Warren and I discussed Jenny's behavior and its influence on our marriage numerous times more. We decided to take a break from Jenny for a while to focus on our relationship. Warren committed to minimize his contact with her and to always communicate with me before making any plans that involved his sister. It was not an easy decision for him, and I could feel the guilt weighing on him, but he saw that it was vital for our marriage. For the first few weeks, everything was peaceful. Jenny seemed to respect our boundaries, and Warren and I were spending some much-needed quality time together. We resumed regular date evenings, which we hadn't done in months due to Jenny's frequent interruptions. We even began organizing a vacation for just the two of us. A hiking trip through multiple national parks, which we had discussed since we first started dating but had never found the time for. For the first time in a long time, I felt optimistic about the future. However, roughly 3 weeks after Warren's birthday party, events took an unexpected turn. It was a quiet Sunday evening, and Warren and I were watching a movie on the couch when his phone called. Mrs. Johnson, Jenny's neighbor, was identified on the caller ID. Warren replied, his brow pinched with anxiety. Warren's face lost color as I watched, and he jumped up abruptly, nearly knocking over his glass of wine. "We'll be right there," he stated, his voice cracking. He turned to me, his eyes wide with horror. "Jenny has been in a vehicle accident. She is at St. Mary's Hospital." The drive to the hospital was tense. Warren held the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white while I attempted to obtain additional information from Mrs. Johnson over the phone. Jenny was driving home from a bar when she lost control of her vehicle and smashed into a tree. The police suspected she was driving under the influence. We arrived at the hospital and found Jenny in the emergency department. She was conscious but definitely in pain, with her right arm in a temporary cast and tiny wounds on her face from the smashed windshield. When she spotted Warren, she burst into tears and reached for him with her good arm. "I'm so sorry," she wailed as Warren gently embraced her. I botched up so badly." I stood awkwardly to the side, divided between sorrow for Jenny's situation and annoyance that yet another crisis had interrupted our lives. The doctor informed us that Jenny had been fortunate. Aside from a fractured arm and some cuts and bruises, she had no serious injuries. However, she would require someone to care for her for a few weeks while her arm healed. Warren offered to take care of her before I could even think about what that meant. "She can stay with us," he added, looking at me pleadingly. "Just till she gets back on her feet. We cannot leave her alone like this." I wanted to object and remind him of our commitment to keep boundaries, but how could I say no in this situation? I reluctantly nodded in agreement. Jenny moved in with us the next day, and it's been a nightmare ever since. She continuously demands Warren's attention, phoning him for everything. Warren, can you help me with my pillows? Warren, I need a glass of water. Warren, can you change the channel for me? It's as if she's returned to a defenseless child, and Warren is only too willing to play the role of protecting Big Brother. She complains about everything. Nancy, the stuff you cook is too spicy. Don't you realize I have a delicate stomach? The way you've set up the guest room, the sun comes in too bright in the morning. Can't you get some better curtains? And just about anything else she can think of. I try to be patient, reminding myself that she is injured and likely in pain, but it is wearing me down. The worst part is that I am beginning to suspect Jenny isn't as helpless as she claims to be. I've noticed her using her damaged arm normally when she thinks no one is looking, like reaching for the TV remote or adjusting her hair. But the moment Warren enters the room, she returns to wincing and gripping her arm as if it were made of glass. When I conveyed this to Warren, he accused me of being neurotic and uncaring. She's hurt, Nancy, he replied, his voice tight and frustrated. Why can't you just be supportive? I felt crazy. Was I truly being unreasonable, or was Jenny manipulating us both? Things escalated last night when I overheard Jenny on the phone with a buddy. I hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but as I walked past the guest room to do laundry, I heard Jenny's voice, which was especially energetic and enthusiastic. Curiosity got the best of me, so I stopped outside the door to listen. Girl, you wouldn't believe how well this is working out, Jenny said, laughing. I have Warren waiting for me hand and foot. He's so concerned about me that it's almost too simple. She paused to listen to her friend's response. The arm. Oh, it scarcely hurts anymore, but they don't need to know, do they? I believe I can stretch this out for at least another month. Maybe by then I'll be able to convince Warren that he's far better off with his real family. I felt like I had been hit in the stomach. All of my concerns were confirmed in the worst conceivable way. Jenny wasn't simply taking advantage of the circumstance, she was deliberately attempting to build a wedge between Warren and myself. I am at a loss on what to do. I tried to tell Warren what I heard, but he didn't believe me. He thinks I'm just trying to get rid of Jenny, and that my animosity for her is clouding my judgment. Why would she lie about being hurt? He said, his voice filled with mistrust. That doesn't make any sense, Nancy. I feel insane in my own home, watching this lady influence my husband and destroy our marriage. The vacation we had planned seems like a distant memory now. Instead of wandering through gorgeous scenery, I'm stuck in a house with a lady who appears determined to destroy my life. I'm thinking about taking a few days off to clear my mind, possibly staying with my friend Lisa, but I'm concerned about leaving Warren alone with Jenny and her influence. What if I return to discover she has entirely turned him against me? I love my spouse, but I'm beginning to question if our marriage will survive this. How can we move forward if he does not believe me? How do I compete with the bond he has with Jenny? Any advice is much appreciated. I feel like I've reached the end of my rope and have no idea what to do next. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my previous report, and Jenny's situation has taken an unexpected turn. I'd like to thank everyone who gave advice and support. It really helped me get through this difficult period. After my last update, I was at my wit's end. I couldn't continue to watch Jenny damage my marriage. Taking several commenters' advice, I decided to collect actual evidence of Jenny's deceit. I know many of you recommended against it, citing privacy concerns, but I felt I had no choice. I installed a covert camera in the living room. I told myself it was only for a few days, just to show to Warren that I wasn't hallucinating. Within 2 days, I had convincing evidence that Jenny used her wounded arm regularly when Warren was not around. I caught her lifting heavy books, fixing her hair, and even opening a tight jar lid with the arm she said was too painful to use. The true shock came when I recorded a chat between Jenny and one of her friends who had come to visit. Jenny blatantly criticized me, calling me gullible and boasting about how simple it was to deceive Warren. He's always been a sucker for the damsel in distress act, she told me. A few crocodile tears and he's putty in my hands. I felt horrible listening to it, but I knew I'd found the proof I needed. With shaking hands, I transferred the tape to a USB drive and waited for Warren to return home from work. When Warren came, I sat down and told him what I'd done. He was outraged at first, accusing me of invading Jenny's privacy, but I begged him to simply view the films. His face turned pale as he saw a film of Jenny using her arm normally and heard her taunting words. I can't believe this, he said quietly, his voice scratchy. Why would she do this? I had no response for him, but I felt a flood of relief wash over me. Warren could now see the truth. Warren confronted Jenny in the evening. The subsequent argument was fierce and difficult to watch. Jenny first denied everything and accused me of doctoring the footage. But when confronted with overwhelming facts, she broke down. Jenny acknowledged, through tears, misrepresenting her injuries and attempting to separate us. She discussed feeling abandoned when Warren married and her dread of losing the only family she had left. Jenny had never shown me this side of herself before, vulnerable, terrified, and extremely insecure. Warren, split between rage and concern for his sister, urged Jenny to leave our home immediately. She begged him to let her stay, pledging to reform, but Warren stood firm. "You need help, Jenny," he continued, his tone stern but not harsh. "Professional assistance, and until you respect our marriage, you are not welcome here." Jenny left that night, amidst tears and recriminations. The house felt strangely quiet after she left. Warren and I sat in silence for a long time, absorbing the day's events. Warren finally turned to me and apologized. "I'm so sorry, Nancy," he replied, his eyes overflowing with regret. "I should have believed you. I should have seen what was happening." We talked late into the night about trust, family, and the future of our marriage. Things remained tense for a few weeks, but they gradually improved. Warren went to therapy to sort out his confusing feelings about his relationship with Jenny. We also began couples counseling to repair the trust that had been broken and enhance our marriage. Then, approximately a month ago, we got unexpected news. Jenny had been arrested for fraud. Apparently, she was running a small-scale Ponzi scheme, defrauding friends and acquaintances of their cash. The classic automobile she had given Warren for his birthday. Warren was heartbroken after purchasing the item with stolen money. He felt bad for not recognizing the warning flags earlier and for maybe enabling Jenny's actions over time. I did my best to encourage him during this difficult period, reminding him that Jenny's actions were entirely her responsibility. We've now discovered that Jenny's deceptive behavior stretched far beyond our relationship. She had a history of abusing people's trust and sympathy for personal benefit. It was a difficult realization, but it helped Warren recognize that her actions were not his fault. This entire event has put our marriage to the test. There are times when trust difficulties return, when one of us retreats into our own thoughts, but we're working through them together. We've learned to communicate more openly and rely on one another for assistance. We're still processing what's happened, but we're doing it together. Warren has resolved to entirely remove himself from Jenny until she seeks proper help and makes sincere atonement. It's been difficult for him, but he knows it's vital for our well-being. We're focusing on healing and progress. We postponed our vacation and are looking forward to spending uninterrupted time together. There is still a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in a long time, I am cautiously hopeful about our prospects. Update 3. It has been 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some concluding thoughts on this chapter of our lives. Warren and I have made considerable progress in our relationship. Couples counseling has been really beneficial, teaching us improved communication skills and how to support one another during stressful situations. We had to relearn how to trust one another, which wasn't always easy. There have been disagreements, times of uncertainty, and nights spent sleeping in different rooms. However, we've rediscovered the love and connection that brought us together in the first place. Warren has persisted with his individual treatment, working through his complex emotions toward Jenny and his background. He's had to face some difficult truths about his childhood and the relationship between him and his sister. It has been terrible for him, but I can see him becoming stronger and more self-aware with each passing week. Jenny pleaded guilty to the fraud charges and is now serving a 2-year sentence. Warren debated whether or not to attend her trial, but eventually opted against it. He wrote her a letter explaining his decision and expressing his hope that she will utilize this time to ponder and seek the assistance she requires. We haven't had direct touch with Jenny since she went to prison, but we did get a letter from her about a month ago. She apologized for her behavior and the anguish she had caused us. She added that she has been diagnosed with many mental health concerns and is now receiving appropriate therapy. While the letter appears earnest, Warren and I are wary about getting our hopes up. We've agreed that if Jenny displays persistent long-term change following her release, we'll explore gradually restoring our relationship with her. But for now, we're keeping our distance. On a bright side, Warren and I finally went on the vacation we had planned. We spent 2 weeks hiking and camping in national parks, reconnecting with each other and the mutual interests that drew us together in the beginning. There were tensions, old scars emerging in quiet moments around the campfire, but also moments of joy, of rediscovering one another away from the stresses of our daily lives. We've also taken important decisions about our future. We plan to relocate to a new city next year for a fresh start. Warren has been offered an excellent work opportunity, and I'm delighted about the prospects for my freelance business in a new market. We both believe that a change of environment will allow us to put the turmoil of the past behind us and focus on creating our lives together. Looking back, I realize how this difficult experience has ultimately enhanced our marriage. We've learned to stand together in the face of external demands, to instinctively trust each other, and to prioritize our partnership at all times. Warren has developed tremendously, learning to set appropriate boundaries and spot manipulative conduct, even from close ones. Personally, I've learned to trust my instincts and speak up when something feels wrong. I've also discovered the value of patience and understanding, particularly when dealing with complex family dynamics. Although the trip has been arduous, I am grateful for where it has taken us. Warren and I are closer than ever, and we are cautiously optimistic about what the future holds. We know there will always be obstacles, but we are better prepared to confront them together. Thank you to everyone who has followed our story and provided support along the way. Your guidance and encouragement have been helpful. Here is to fresh beginnings and healthier connections. Fiancée banned me from my dad's wedding because of my facial scars. Now she's harassing us and got arrested after we called the cops. I am 16 years old, female, and am attending high school. I've had a horrible run recently with my soon-to-be stepmother. My biological mother died when I was 6 years old. Even though I was very little and my recollections of her are foggy, I recall that my father and I adored her more than anything in the world. She was pretty much my best friend when I was a kid, and I'm grateful that I got to be her daughter for the brief time she was with us. My father was terribly melancholy when my mother died. Even though he tried to disguise it from me, I could tell he was in pain. So I tried my best to cheer him up and be a good daughter. My mother's death drew us closer together, and my father assumed the role of best friend and confidant that my mother had previously occupied. He took on the duties of mother and father with ease, and I am grateful to have had him as a parent. He has never let me down. He was always there for me as I grew up, and even when he was busy at work, I never felt like I couldn't ask him for guidance or simply talk. He always made it clear to me that he was accessible for me, no matter how busy he appeared to be, and this stuck with me. My father began dating Emily 3 years ago, and I was overjoyed for him. I thought he deserved all the happiness in the world, and I was relieved he was finally getting on with his life. I wasn't insecure, as some kids would have been in my situation. I truly supported his relationship with Emily because I wanted him to be able to enjoy his life to the best. He had done an excellent job being there for me after my mother died, and now I wanted him to be there for himself. Most of my family was surprised to learn that, at the age of 13, I had such adult thoughts, and they liked it. But for some reason, Emily seemed to be the only person who disliked me. Even though I had no issues with her, Emily's attitude toward me altered the first time we met. She had been nice to me while my father was in the room, but as soon as he left, I felt something change. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I can see that her demeanor toward me turned uncaring when my father was not present. When he returned, she was friendly again. I thought that was strange, but at 13, I assumed I was just overthinking things. This pattern persisted for several years. I never spoke up because I didn't consider it a big problem. When my father was not present, all she did was act apathetic, which was not necessarily terrible but also not good. My father appeared happy, so I didn't say anything. After a year of dating my father, she moved in with us and things changed dramatically. She moved in with us after a year of dating my father, and it felt strange living with her. She worked from home, and as soon as I returned from school, things became unpleasant and tense. Despite the fact that we shared a home, it felt as if she was purposefully ignoring me, pretending I wasn't there. She limited her interactions with me to a minimum, but as soon as my father arrived from work, she transformed into a completely different person, behaving like my best friend. I thought it was unusual, but because it had no detrimental effect on my life, I just went along with it and never brought it up again. We had an unwritten agreement not to bring it up for the sake of my father's happiness. I quickly understood that she and I were not close and would never be, which I was perfectly happy with. That's how we spent the previous few years living together. And my father had no idea we didn't really have a relationship. He thought we were close because of how she described our connection while he was present. They got engaged a few months ago and planned to marry last week. However, the wedding did not take place, and I feel somewhat sorry about this. Emily approached me around 30 minutes before the wedding and informed me that she did not want me to attend. She claimed I appeared too distracting, and would detract from the beauty of the event. Emily said that she had hired experienced photographers and didn't want me to damage the images, thinking I would understand. I was meant to be a bridesmaid, but she simply appointed me to please my father. I knew she didn't want me to be a member of the bridal party, but I consented since it would please my father. I also knew why she didn't want me to attend the ceremony. A dog had attacked my face a few months before. It was a tragic situation, but I was responsible for it. I have a habit of caressing dogs, so when I noticed a woman walking her German Shepherd, I crouched to pet him. I must have startled him, because he attacked me. My nose and cheeks received the brunt of it because they were at the same level as his mouth. I had to be hurried to the hospital, and while it was traumatic, I am well today. My face still has a few surgical scars, but they are mending. I'm not sure if they'll ever go away completely, but they're fading gradually. I had a difficult time accepting the notion that these scars would remain on my face for a long time. I was quite insecure, but my father convinced me that I looked great, and the scars were a sign of strength. His encouragement helped me accept my new appearance. Most people have been supportive and attempted to make me feel better, but Emily was not among them. While I knew she was superficial, I didn't anticipate her to intentionally make me feel horrible about myself. I was really hurt when she informed me that she did not want me at the ceremony. I questioned her right immediately if this was related to the scars on my face. She didn't even hesitate to tell me that she thought my face was distracting and hideous. She didn't want that in her wedding photos 10 years from now since it was unattractive and would mar the photos. As a result, she asked me to move out and requested I not tell my father about it since he would be angry at her, which was the last thing she needed on her wedding day. She explained that she was already anxious from organizing everything and ensuring that everything went smoothly and correctly. She honestly expected me to leave and not attend my own father's wedding because she thought I wasn't attractive enough. She was so entitled and inconsiderate that I resolved to finally tell my father everything that day. I didn't care if it was his wedding day. It was evident to me at that point that Emily was not the type of person who belonged with my father. However, I did not want to confront her directly, so I told her I understood and vowed to remain away from the ceremony. I also assured her that I would find an explanation to explain my absence to my father without getting her in trouble. She was naive enough to fall for it and even thanked me, saying I was doing her a tremendous service and that she hadn't expected me to be so understanding about everything. She claimed I was really mature for my age. I simply laughed it off and exited the room. We were all staying in a hotel because the wedding was taking place on the hotel grounds. After leaving her room, I returned on my own and quickly contacted my father. He was already downstairs, where the wedding was scheduled to take place, and I did not want to waste time looking for him. Even though the wedding was only half an hour away, I knew I was the only person whose call he would answer. As expected, he responded on the first ring. I instantly began my story, telling him everything without halting. I recounted how Emily had treated me over the last few years, how she pretended to be in a relationship with me solely to keep him happy, and how she clearly didn't care about me or being a member of a family. I told him that even if he went forward with the wedding, I needed to give him the truth before he made a decision. He did not say much during the call. All he said was that he was glad I told him the truth, even if it was only minutes before the wedding. He said he understood what he had to do and hung up, telling me to wait in my room until he told me to come out. For the following several hours, I had no idea what was going on. People were contacting me to ask what was going on and why the wedding was delayed, but they stopped after about an hour. Everything became silent. I tried calling my father, but it went to voicemail. I also called some of his pals, who indicated they had no idea what was going on either. Apparently, after my phone conversation, my father went up to Emily's room to speak with her and did not return. The only thing he told his buddies was that the wedding was no longer happening, and that was the message they spread to everyone, so people stopped inquiring about it. I was quite scared because I thought my father would be upset with me for ruining his wedding. I cried in my room for over 4 hours before he arrived to collect me. When I asked him what was going on, he said I didn't need to worry because we were going home. Naturally, I inquired about Emily, and he informed me that she would not be accompanying us and that their relationship had ended. He said it without emotion, so I'm not sure if he was upset about it at the time. Even now I have no idea because he refuses to discuss it. I'm guessing he's upset, but he's not ready to talk about it with me. I'm guessing he's plainly upset but refuses to discuss it so I don't feel guilty. However, it is not working because I'm not feeling well, as Emily has confirmed. She's been speaking negatively about me and I can't believe a woman her age could say such things about a 16-year-old who was only trying to protect her father. Emily has made multiple Facebook postings, but she does not mention me by name, so I can't really point them out and claim they're about me. But I know they are, since she paints me as a crafty and evil person. It's incredibly upsetting because I don't believe I'm like that at all. She claims that I purposefully chose the last few minutes before the wedding to speak with my father in order to embarrass and disrespect her in front of the guests, alleging that this was always my intention. This could not be further from the truth. The only reason I spoke with my father was because she stated that she did not want me at the wedding because of my scars. She's also claimed that I was the one who faked our relationship and never made an honest effort to connect with her on a human level. There may be some truth to that. When I saw she wasn't the same person around my father as she was with me, I gave up trying to understand or get along with her. I simply ignored her in return. But I assumed that was because she showed no desire in developing a connection with me. I can tell she's unhappy, and I feel responsible for ruining the entire wedding. Even though I know I have no reason to feel bad, I am unsure about what I did. A part of me believes I owe both Emily and my father an apology. Maybe I should have spoken up sooner. Keeping everything to myself until the wedding made everything worse, but I'm also worried I'm behaving out of emotion. I wanted to be sure I wasn't in the wrong before doing anything. Am I the asshole, AITA, for informing my father about my stepmother's behavior half an hour before the wedding, leading it to be cancelled because she made a comment about my scars and stated that she did not want me at the ceremony for the purpose of flawless pictures? Update 1. Thank you so much for your comments on my initial post. I appreciate what everyone has said. You are all so kind. I have determined that I will not apologize. After what has transpired, I genuinely do not believe I should, and I certainly do not owe anything to Emily. Everything she accuses me of is precisely who she is in reality. My father has blocked her everywhere, so she can no longer reach him. However, she can still text me, which she did. She contacted me a few days ago and went off on me about what had happened prior to the wedding. It has been over 15 days since the wedding, and this occurred around 4 days ago. It began with a routine text in which she requested if we could speak. I figured, why not, while I was still feeling responsible and bad for spoiling the wedding. That proved to be a terrible error. As soon as I informed her she could call, she called me, and when I answered, she and several of her friends began yelling at me, calling me the most awful insults they could think of. This lasted for almost a minute and a half. I was so shocked that I couldn't grasp what was going on. This was a woman in her 30s, and I understand why she didn't like me, but this was literal bullying, and I wasn't expecting it after all her posts. I suppose I should have known better and avoided interacting with her at all, but my guilt clouded my judgment. Anyway, once I came to my senses, I hung up the phone and went straight to my father. I informed him about the Facebook posts and phone call. I also apologized for keeping it from him, explaining that I didn't want to make him any more angry than he was already. Attempting to keep things from getting worse simply made matters worse. We had a serious discussion about my behavior, and he informed me that I could come to him with whatever difficulty I was having, whenever I needed his assistance, because that's what he was here for. He emphasized that he is here to protect me and that he, not I, is the parent, therefore I do not need to worry about protecting him from anything. He also informed me that I am the most important person in his life, and nothing will ever change that, so I didn't have to worry about trivial matters like him being unhappy about something so significant. He stated he was glad I came clean just in time so he didn't marry Emily, because things may have turned out a lot worse. That encounter taught me that I should quit second-guessing myself and, at the very least, be honest with my father. If anything, he is the one guy who can always get me out of trouble, and I need to be honest with him for both of our sakes. Following our chat, he decided to phone Emily and express his displeasure with how she had handled me. He wasn't aware of the post because he and his buddies had blocked her, so they had no idea what she was up to. I was the only one who remained on her friend list, most likely because she wanted me to hear all she was saying, knowing how it would affect me. I had blindly fallen for it all, without considering the repercussions. I was disappointed in myself for being so naive, but my father saw it positively. He assured me I wasn't an idiot, but 16, and that's what I'm going to use to justify all of my poor actions around this time, heh. Anyway, he called Emily, and this time, it was my father who put her on blast. He texted her to see if she was available to chat, and when she answered yes, he called her and confronted her for bullying me with her friends. He warned her that if she harassed me again, she would suffer severe penalties and threatened to report her to the cops. Then he hung up without giving her an opportunity to explain, because she couldn't truly defend her conduct. Update 2. This post comes barely a day after my last one since Emily came to our house this morning to speak with my father, and it did not go well. I'm not sure why, but she still believes she can repair her relationship with my father and reconcile with him, despite what she did to me. Obviously, my father did not open the door when she arrived. He advised her to leave because he had nothing to say and did not want to hear from her. But she refused to leave until she had a chance to speak with him. When I told her she wasn't welcome anymore, she yelled at me, telling me I had nothing to do with anything and should stay out of it. She claimed I was pushing my nose where it did not belong. This time I was not going to back down. This was my house, and she was in my territory now. I yelled back, warning her that if she tried to ruin our weekend, we'd call the cops and have her taken off the property. Unfortunately for her, she did not take me seriously and continued to argue with me, as if this would get her anywhere with my father. She's so unreasonable that she came to reconcile with my father but ended up creating a fight with me, something she knew my father would not enjoy. It was evident that defeating me was more important to her than reuniting with my father, which was heartbreaking. My father actually cared for her, and here she was making a spectacle of herself by arguing with his teenage daughter for no apparent reason other than her irrational hatred of me. After battling with her for a long time, I knew I couldn't continue. She was too illogical and unreasonable to talk to, and it was so frustrating that I couldn't even argue with her properly. She kept blaming me for everything, despite the fact that she was the one who canceled the wedding. I was growing annoyed and didn't want to quarrel anymore, so my father and I simply stopped replying to her. We called the police to have her taken away since we didn't want to waste any more of our mourning on her. She continued screaming after that, but it made no difference to us because we had finished talking to her. When the cops eventually arrived, they arrested her and took her away. I don't think it'll be more than a slap on the wrist for her, but at least she learned her lesson, which I hope will stick. She was truly startled that we had contacted the police, since she had not expected it. It was clear on her face when we walked out of the house as she was being arrested. At some point, she realized we no longer cared about her and began yelling at me even louder than before, which was a daring move given the cops were close there. She was practically demonstrating herself to be insane. She completely lost control and began yelling at me, which shocked even the officers. That's one of the reasons my father filed charges against her, even if it wasn't our original intention. But with her cursing at me, it couldn't be ignored. Her behavior was insane and sad, and I'm relieved she's gone. I sincerely hope she doesn't return because we don't need this in our lives. My father and I have dealt with enough drama to last a lifetime in the last 2 weeks, and we are finally done. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's been about 3 months since the wedding was cancelled. My father and I agreed to take a trip to clear our minds. I'm on summer break right now, and we went hiking, something my mother used to enjoy. I enjoy being in nature as well, so this is ideal for both of us. We've had a terrific time, and I'm grateful that my father and I are actively working to improve our connection. This ensures that past misconceptions do not occur again. At the end of the day, we are all we have, and he is the only family I can rely on. I need to be honest with him and tell him vital things instead of worrying that something will upset him or trying to protect him from things he doesn't need to be protected from. We haven't heard from Emily in a long time, and I truly hope that continues. I know hate is a strong term, but I don't think it describes how I feel about her. According to what I know, after being jailed, she was released but continued to speak negatively about me and my father. I honestly don't care anymore because that's the type of person she is, and we're relieved to be rid of her. It does not matter. I couldn't give them grandchildren, so my parents convinced my husband to leave me. They were shocked when I had a baby girl 3 years later. So, I, 30F, recently ran into my parents and ex-husband Scott, 33M, and I'm not sure how I feel about the encounter. For reference, my parents and I have not spoken in almost 3 years, and neither has my ex-husband. We split 3 years ago and have not communicated since then. In fact, I've done all in my power to avoid seeing them again because they devastated my life and mental health while I was still with them, to the point that I felt like I didn't deserve to exist. After my divorce, I went to the suburbs and sought to create a different life for myself, away from everyone and everything associated with my past. So running into them recently was a great surprise for me, and I said some things to them that I'm not sure were the best move for me. My parents had always desired a boy. It's not that they mistreated me growing up, but it was clear to me that they would have treated me differently if I had been a boy. My mother had even mentioned it on multiple occasions, and I had tried my hardest to be the son they never had, but I was unable to achieve. After graduating from college and moving out, I tried to stay in touch with my parents because, no matter what, they were still my family and the only family I had. I wasn't really close to my grandparents, and I didn't have any uncles or aunts who would look after me. So I accepted my fate. No matter how much they pushed me away, they were still my sole family, and even if they did not appear to be interested in staying in touch with me, I attempted to retain contact. When I was about 23 years old, I began dating Scott. We met at a concert and had an instant connection. After 6 months of dating, I introduced him to my parents, and they began to make more of an attempt to communicate with me. They would call me more frequently, inquire about my relationship, and generally show more interest in my life. I had noticed the difference, but because it was welcome, I didn't give it much thought and simply accepted it. The longer I dated Scott, the more involved my parents were in my life. At one point, it seemed like we were all one big happy family. I was overjoyed since it was everything I had ever desired, so I didn't question it, even though I should have. After a little more than 2 years of dating, we became engaged and married after 3 years together. After we married, things were going well for a time, and I was enjoying my life as a newlywed. However, 6 months after my wedding, my parents began hinting that they wanted a grandchild. I was only 26 at the time, and I wasn't quite prepared. I wanted to wait a few more years before trying for a kid, but at their suggestion, I spoke with Scott, who was all for the notion of establishing a family. Because of his eagerness, we decided to begin trying for a baby immediately after our wedding. We tried for a long time, but after several months, we were still unable to conceive. We began to suspect that anything was wrong and opted to be tested. Unfortunately, I found out that I was infertile. It was a great shock for both of us, but my parents were even more disappointed, and they didn't even try to hide it. My father went away instead of comforting me when we told both of our parents. We decided to stop trying for a while, and Scott and I spoke about attempting other methods, such as IVF. However, this would be extremely costly, and success on our first effort was not certain. So we had to postpone our plans to raise a family until we had saved enough money to cover multiple rounds of IVF. We were satisfied with that, despite our initial disappointment. However, my parents were really dissatisfied. They stopped visiting and talking to me, and no matter how much I tried to explain that this wasn't all my fault, they weren't ready to listen. After a few weeks, I was so disappointed by their actions that I called them and vented. I told them they had been treating me unfairly since I couldn't give them a grandchild right now, which made me wonder if they were really capable of being decent grandparents when I did have a child. I informed them that they had always treated me cruelly because I was not a boy, and I saw how differently they treated my spouse. For a long time, I attempted to ignore it and keep our friendship going, but now I'm not interested in keeping in touch with them and would rather that they stay away from me forever. It was difficult for me to express that since for so long, all I wanted was their acceptance. But now I recognize that it was nearly impossible. Instead of apologizing, they escalated their actions and were happy with me not speaking to them again. They told me I was worthless as a woman since I couldn't have children, and they wanted nothing to do with me. It was painful to hear them say that, but at least I knew where I stood with them. After that phone call, I did not talk with my parents again, and we were done. When I told Scott about the phone call, he was sympathetic at first, but after a few days I saw that his attitude toward me was shifting. I ignored it at first because I was already going through a difficult time mentally, and I didn't want to accept that my spouse might leave me. So I started pretending that nothing was going on and that everything was fine. Within a few months, he had changed entirely and was constantly chilly to me. I tried everything I could to save our relationship, but nothing worked. 3 months later, he returned home with the divorce papers and announced that he was done with me. I couldn't say I was startled, but I did try to reason with him. I told him we could always try for a kid later, but he stated he had a lot of reasons to leave and didn't want to talk about it. He wanted it to end as quickly as possible because it was difficult for both of us. The divorce took nearly 7 months to finalize, and they were the most difficult months of my life. I was absolutely alone, and I had broken down. To make matters worse, a few weeks after he informed me that he wanted a divorce and had moved out, I learned from a few relatives that Scott was supposedly living with my parents. I knew talking to them wouldn't help, so I decided to speak with my in-laws about it. It was an unpleasant chat, but they informed me that my parents had been in contact with Scott for several months. I suppose they had been brainwashing him into leaving me, which is why Scott decided to leave, even though my in-laws thought it was a bad idea. He had argued with them and stopped speaking to them. I'm not sure what they told Scott, but my in-laws informed me that Scott implied my parents had said he deserved better. So I'm still not sure what they told him, but I think they were just desperate to have a son in any way possible. Since I was no longer speaking to them and they couldn't hope for a grandchild from me, they quickly decided to take Scott under their wing and get him to leave me. My divorce left me extremely damaged, and it took me several months to get back on my feet, but I did it. Since then, I have not looked back and have done everything in my ability to forget the past and go forward. After my divorce, I moved to the suburbs. I started a new job, changed my appearance, and blocked my parents and Scott on social media. I also told all of my former friends and relatives that I never wanted to hear anything about them again, and I didn't want them to know anything about me. Everyone respected it. For the past 3 years I've been in treatment and doing well. The only thing that bothered me was the absence of a baby. I still desired a child despite the fact that I no longer had a husband or parents. I felt like I was ready to become a mother. Last year, I began IVF procedures and became pregnant with the help of an anonymous donor. 4 months later, I gave birth to my beautiful girl. Life has been very good since she was born, and I'm very pleased. 4 days ago, I was walking down the street with her when I ran into my folks and Scott. I was astonished to find them on my street. I believed they were come to visit me, but then I noticed they were stepping out of a residence a few blocks away. When they saw me, I froze. I should have returned home, but I simply couldn't bring myself to do so. They approached me, greeted me, and immediately inquired about the baby, as they were aware that I was infertile. I responded truthfully, and by that point I had comprehended what was going on and began walking back home. But Scott stopped me and said he was delighted he ran into me because he had been thinking a lot about me lately. They had apparently come to visit his aunt, who had recently moved into the neighborhood, and he took bumping into me as a message from the cosmos that he should make things right and give our relationship another opportunity. My parents were also standing there, and they demanded that I invite them home to talk about all that has been going on in my life, as they had clearly missed out on a lot. I was shocked that they were even suggesting this, let alone that they expected me to allow them in after everything that had transpired in the past. It took me 3 years to move on from everything, and I'm still in therapy trying to work through my emotions. So I had an outburst. I told them I'd rather have a lot of murderous wild animals in my house than them, since they'd still be better. I told them to quit acting like they cared about me or what was going on in my life, since the only reason they wanted to talk to me now was that I had a baby. My parents wanted to talk to me because they were finally going to have a grandson, and Scott wanted to talk to me because, clearly, he couldn't find anyone else. He assumed that because I had previously been able to conceive, getting pregnant again would be easy, and he could just return to my life. It was sickening that they only regarded me as a supply of babies, not a human person with real emotions. They had all abandoned me when I most needed their emotional support. Even though I had expected this from my parents, who had made it plain throughout my upbringing that they would have chosen a boy, it was nonetheless shocking. They believed that a woman's worth was determined by her ability to be a mother. The big surprise, though, was Scott. He had spent so many years with me and soothed me, but he had still gone along with whatever my parents suggested for some strange reason and abandoned me when I was at my lowest point. I hadn't forgotten anything they'd said to me, so I just repeated everything back to them. Since I was worthless as a woman and Scott deserved better, perhaps they should leave me alone now. I've always been a quiet and shy person, but when they confronted me on the street that day, I yelled at them from the top of my lungs. It was the culmination of 3 years' worth of rage, so it was quite unpleasant. After I finished ranting at them, I dashed back to my house and closed the door as quickly as possible. I was feeling quite bad after that, so I opted not to go to work for a few days and have stayed at home with my baby ever since. Since then, my interactions with my parents and Scott have played over and over in my mind. I honestly had no idea what I was going to do about it until last evening, when I got a call from an unknown number. I'm not sure why, but I decided to answer the phone yesterday. Normally, I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. It was Scott on the other phone, and I could hear my folks whispering in the background. I'm very sure they weren't attempting to be quiet, they just wanted me to know they were there. Anyway, I tried not to be too impacted by it. I just informed him that I did not want him to phone me again because otherwise, I would have to take preventive measures against him, which I did not want to do. I reminded him that the same thing applied to my parents. I didn't want anything to do with them, and the only reason I answered the phone was to inform them that I was done. I had finished 3 years ago and was still clinging to it. But Scott told me to hear him out, and I couldn't bring myself to hang up, so I let him speak. He admitted to me that he, like my parents, had made mistakes, but it was out of disappointment. He mentioned that both my parents and he were looking forward to beginning a family, having a baby and so on. They struggled to accept the fact that I was infertile and hesitant to do IVF until we had saved enough money. They hadn't handled it well, but they wanted another chance to prove they were worthy of being in my life. After a few seconds, I informed him I didn't want any of the rubbish they were selling me. They wouldn't have cared about me if they hadn't seen me carrying a kid that day, and that was the bottom line. That was the truth, and I was sick of them pretending otherwise. I was about to hang up when my parents spoke out from the background, saying that this was exactly the type of behavior that had caused them to cut me off in the first place. Apparently, they thought I was selfish and just concerned with myself when I discovered I was infertile. They said that instead of giving everyone their space, I constantly forced my presence on them and tried to get them to comfort me and pay attention to me, despite the fact that they were dealing with the news themselves. That, they explained, was why everyone had pushed me away, leaving me with no one to turn to. I didn't continue the conversation after that. I simply hung up. I know they were just attempting to dupe me, but I can't help but question myself now. So for my own peace of mind, I need to ask, am I to blame since I sought reassurance after learning that I was infertile? Edit. First and foremost, many people questioned why my parents had not tried for another child after I was born, especially because they desired a boy so much. My mother experienced a lot of issues with her first pregnancy, so the doctors advised her to wait a few years before trying again. But even when my mother had me, she was in her mid-30s. Waiting a few more years would have put my mother in her late 30s, making the pregnancy considerably riskier. My mother had a tough time conceiving me, just as I had battled and eventually discovered I was infertile. The only difference was that while she was struggling, her mother-in-law was rude to her. But this time, it was my own mother who couldn't stop thinking about how I felt. Anyway, that was the reason they couldn't have another kid and were left with only me, a girl. I'm not sure what kind of relationship Scott had with his parents, but from what I saw, they seemed to get along nicely. As of now, I'm not sure if they've been able to reconcile following their recent fallout, because I haven't contacted his parents and, obviously, haven't spoken with Scott about it. Scott is an only kid, so he didn't face any competition. When I visited his parents, I could tell they loved him and had treated him well since boyhood. So I'm not sure why he became so attached to my parents. At least with my parents, I knew they wanted a son, which explains why they started treating Scott that way. But with Scott, I'm not sure what went wrong. I've spent the last 3 years trying to forget about everything, so I hadn't given it any attention or questioned it. But now that you've brought it up, I feel compelled to speak with my ex-in-laws to get to the bottom of it, if only for my own curiosity. Anyway, I hope this answers any questions. Update 1. I decided to speak with my ex-in-laws to find out why Scott has been acting the way he has. To be honest, I couldn't think of a single reason why he needed to go visit his aunt with my parents. It was simply bizarre. I already knew it wasn't my fault. They had deserted me when I needed them because they are bad people, and I knew they were only attempting to gaslight me. I just wanted reassurance and didn't want to bother my friends with it because it was too personal, so I shared it here. So, thank you to everyone who informed me that I wasn't the terrible guy here. It was weird reaching out to them after 3 years of no communication, especially because the last time I spoke with them was around the time of the divorce. Fortunately, they were pleased to hear from me. After some small conversation, I came right to the issue and inquired why Scott was so close to my parents, and if they had contacted him. They told me that a few months after their last battle, they had reconciled with Scott and were now in contact with him. However, he had kept in touch with my parents. They clarified that Scott was adored as a youngster, so he wasn't attempting to replace his parents with mine. However, my parents had been suspicious since the start of our relationship. Even when we were dating, they attempted to persuade him to join them. Scott had informed his parents that my parents would periodically invite him to supper, even when I was busy, and that he would accompany them alone. He thought this was something to brag about because he believed he had impressed my parents simply by being himself, which was partially correct. Being a guy was enough to impress them. They had already spent a lot of one-on-one time together without my knowledge, and Scott had begun to look up to them as parental figures, despite the fact that he had his own parents who he respected. It was very complicated. On top of that, my parents were continually showering him with expensive presents and writing him checks. That was the money Scott offered to use for IVF while we were together, but I assumed he was joking because we didn't have that much money. I never wanted him to do anything dirty for money, and he didn't want to tell me that he had gotten a large sum of money from my parents since it would have forced him to reveal the nature of his relationship with them. Even after that, I declined to go with IVF because I did not believe he had the funds and I wanted to save. My parents used that to persuade him to oppose me, claiming he deserved better, someone who believed in him. Within a few months, they were able to brainwash him, and he eventually left me. My ex-in-laws apologized to me, but said that while they disagreed with Scott's relationship with my parents, he was their only son, and they couldn't cut him off either. I don't blame them, they owe me nothing, and they were only being helpful by speaking the truth. Now that I know the reality, I see no need to entertain any of them if they contact me. They're all horrible people that don't deserve my attention. Update 2. I finally decided to return to work after nearly 2 weeks off. Fortunately, I have plenty of maternity time left because I did not take the entire 6 months off in one go, and my company's policy is flexible. While I was at work, just my daughter and her babysitter remained at home. I trust the nanny totally because she has excellent recommendations and I know her personally. She's an excellent woman. She called me about halfway through the workday. She quickly informed me that she had moved my kid to her own home since she was unsure whether staying at my place was safe given my ex-husband's conduct. I consented and let her take my daughter home, guaranteeing their safety, and then contacted the cops as I drove home. On the phone, she told me that Scott had been outside for a few minutes, yelling for me to come out. When he learned I wasn't home, he attempted to kick down the door. He was cursing loudly and my daughter was sobbing, so my nanny called me right away so I could notify the police. She exited through the back door and strolled to her home via the backyard gate, as she lived only a few minutes away. That way, my baby could be safe while I dealt with my ex-husband and the cops. To be honest, compliments to her. Her primary goal was my child's safety and well-being, which was appropriate. When I got home, the cops had already arrived, and it was clear Scott had been drinking. It seemed strange because it was only around midday, yet there he was, inebriated. I decided to file charges against him because he had really ticked me off and I wanted him out of my life. This also offered me the opportunity to get a restraining order against him, since he was plainly losing control. The authorities took him away, and a few minutes later, my nanny returned with my daughter. I gave her the rest of the day off because I planned to stay at home with my child. I'll probably have to take a few more days off from work, but I'm not complaining because I get to spend more time with my favorite person. Update 3. It's been a few weeks since my previous post. I've been busy caring for my baby and decided to embark on a new project, which has been exciting. Regarding the situation between my parents and Scott, I was able to obtain a restraining order against him. Fortunately, it wasn't too difficult because I had surveillance tape from the day he showed up intoxicated and started throwing a fuss when he learned I wasn't home. I suppose my parents looked at his condition and decided not to bother me anymore, so they've been staying away. My ex-in-laws informed me that, following what happened, they have decided to cut relations with Scott as well. Apparently, he's having trouble locating other ladies, despite his desire to start a family. He can't do it without a partner, and he dislikes the thought of adopting, which may explain why he acted out the other day. But it doesn't mean I have to forgive him, especially given everything he's put me through. My parents are still attempting to badmouth me to my relatives, which is unfortunate because it isn't working. Everyone knows they did the worst thing to me, and now they're pretending they're the victims. That's not how it works, and they're finding out the hard way. I'm delighted they won't have any relationship with their grandchild. I won't allow it. My kid and I will have a lovely life together without anyone troubling us, and I'm determined to be a far better parent than the ones I had as an example. Family betrayed me in court for my son's custody, now they beg for help after my ex turned on them. I secretly recorded their confession. Hello, so this is going to be a little long because I need to include a lot of context for it to make sense. I, 33F, got divorced a few months ago, but it had been planned for over a year. I met my ex-husband James through friends when I was 25, and after 2 years of dating, we decided to live together and marry. His family was quite conservative and traditional, and they did not approve of live-in relationships, so we had to marry if we wanted to be together. I genuinely liked James, so I didn't mind marrying him. My parents supported our decision, so we married. Within a year of living together, I discovered that I was pregnant, and we were ecstatic. It seemed like our family was finally coming together and everything was falling into place. Unfortunately, after I revealed my pregnancy, my in-laws began pressing me to quit my career and focus on being a mother. It didn't help that my job was not very generous about maternity leave, and because I hadn't been there long, my leave would be especially brief. So at the time, I considered the advantages and cons and decided to leave my work. I didn't make this decision alone. James and his parents were convincing me it would be the greatest decision in the long term, so I just had to do it. James appeared assured and promised to take care of the family. I didn't have to worry about money. He'd bring enough home, and my sole attention would be on raising our child. My parents and older brother both agreed it was best if I stopped my job and stayed at home, like my mother had done. She elected not to return to work because family was her top concern. With pressure from both sides of the family, I chose to quit during my second trimester. Everything appeared to be in order, and I had complete faith in my husband to not let me down, so I quit my booming career to become a stay-at-home parent. However, shortly after my kid was born, I observed something peculiar about James's behavior throughout the latter months of my pregnancy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but his vibe felt odd. Sure, he seemed joyful when our baby was born, and I expected things to return to normal, but unfortunately, they worsened. He got angry around me, and if I tried to speak with him, he snapped. He only seemed genuinely happy when he was playing with our son. Aside from that, it seemed like he was constantly annoyed to be at home with me. He started working longer hours, and even on weekends, he made excuses not to spend time with me. I didn't understand what was wrong, but I kept trying to make our marriage work. Unlike him, I still loved him and refused to give up on us. This pattern persisted for around 2 years following my son's birth. James stayed at work longer than required, and even when he came home, he wasn't truly with me. I couldn't really complain since whenever I tried to talk to him, he said he was too exhausted from work. And it was not an easy chore for him to be the sole breadwinner for the household, which was really disrespectful to me because I was perfectly capable of earning money for myself. But I had to rely on him since he promised to make things easy for me. I even asked him a few times if he would rather that I returned to work so that we could split the bills and he didn't have to face all of the pressure. However, he claimed that would be an insult to him and his abilities, and that his parents would never accept. We'd have a difficult time with them if I went back to work. So I stayed at home and raised my son, which was the only thing that made me happy because James had changed. He was no longer the man I'd married. About a year ago, I discovered that James had an affair with one of his co-workers. It was quite difficult for me to find this because I had been skeptical for quite some time. I even snooped through his phone and laptop while he was sleeping and discovered nothing. I knew all of his passwords because he had written them down in his notepad, but that didn't help. It almost seemed as if he had nothing to conceal, and I began to feel dumb for being cautious. I even searched through his possessions for a burner phone or anything odd, but I found nothing. I began to suspect that I was being overly paranoid and insecure. But as luck would have it, I witnessed his cheating firsthand. About a year ago, James and I were organizing a spectacular birthday celebration for our son. He'd invited the co-worker he was fooling with. She was a single mother with a youngster around our age, so I wasn't surprised she got invited. James had informed me she was a very close friend, so I saw nothing wrong with her being there. After my son had cut his birthday cake, I went upstairs to change into more comfortable attire for the celebration. When I got into my bedroom, I saw James and his co-worker making out. She was seated on his lap. It took me a few minutes to grasp what I saw. First and foremost, it was in my bedroom, which exacerbated the situation. Second, they did not even pause when they heard the door open. I had to walk up to them before they noticed I was there. I'm quite sure they felt it was great to make out in my bedroom, at home, just for the thrill of it. But they obviously did not anticipate me to have a complete breakdown. I'm not proud of it, but discovering that what I'd believed for so long was true sparked something inside me. I grabbed the co-worker's hair and began dragging her out of the room. According to what I was later told, James is physically stronger than me, but he was unable to stop me. I can't recall much of it since I had a rage blackout. I carried her downstairs, James following behind me, and tossed her in the center of the room when everyone was still present. I don't recall much of what I said, but I supposedly called her various disparaging names and informed everyone what she and James were up to in my bedroom. I didn't care if my kid or his pals were present. Looking back, that was really uncomfortable and inappropriate, but I didn't consider it at the time. I screamed at the top of my lungs. My parents, brother, and in-laws were all present. My father eventually calmed me down and returned me to my room. Once inside, I completely broke down and sobbed uncontrollably. But rather than staying with me to console me, my father locked me in my room and returned downstairs. I should have known then that my parents did not genuinely care about me. I knew they were more concerned with appearances than reality, but this was absurd. Nobody came to check on me over the following several hours. Even after I calmed down, I had no idea what was happening outside. I didn't have my phone, so I couldn't reach anyone. It wasn't until after midnight that my brother unlocked the door and allowed me out. He didn't even inquire how I was. They probably would have kept me in the room longer if I hadn't started banging on the door like a crazy lady. When I got out, I asked my brother what had transpired since I was locked in. He informed me that practically everyone had fled following my collapse. He also told me James had departed with his parents and our children. My parents, brother and I were the only people left in the house. My brother let me out to discuss what we should do next. But in my family, discussion means telling me what to do. They informed me that I needed to apologize to everyone for how I had behaved at the party. Not only that, but I also needed to apologize to James and his parents. Apparently, James had difficulty convincing his co-worker not to file charges against me because what I did to her was technically an act of physical assault. My family told me that I owed it to James to speak things out and work on our marriage rather than making this a bigger deal. I lost it. I screamed at them to leave my house because I was not about to allow anyone stand under my roof and order me to apologize to my unfaithful spouse. I got into a heated argument with my family because they told me that I owed it to James to make things right and give the marriage another try, or they would sever ties with me. So I told them to go ahead since I had gotten to the point where I didn't care what anyone thought of me. I was going to file for divorce and get out of this situation without anyone's approval. I phoned a lawyer the next day and filed for divorce less than a week after the occurrence. James was served shortly after, and he had the arrogance to express disappointment and disbelief. He returned home the same day he was served with the divorce papers and demanded an explanation. I told him I was not going to take him back after what he had done and how he had disrespected me. We had a nasty verbal argument in which I called him a lot of names, and he promised me that I would never see my son again. I had no idea he would actually keep his word. Then the legal struggle started. We had very few common assets, so the divorce proceedings were far smoother than the custody battle. The house belonged to me because I bought it with my own money, and there was no doubt about that. Everything else was to be auctioned with the earnings divided between us. We only had to wait the 6-month waiting time mandated by the state, after which the divorce would be finalized if a settlement was made. The only disagreement was about alimony. Because James forced me to quit my work and I didn't have enough money. I needed alimony to start anew. He, however, believed that I should not receive any alimony at all. Fortunately, I had a few texts that demonstrated he had promised to support me. Otherwise, I might not have received any. The divorce process was easier for me emotionally because I had already distanced mentally from James. However, it was the custody struggle that truly killed me. Unfortunately, my parents and brother stabbed me in the back for cash. My ex-husband and his lawyer were nasty, and they started building a case against me, painting me as an unstable, reckless, and insane mother. They wanted to show that I was unfit to raise our son alone, so James and his parents should gain full custody. I assumed my parents and brother had been bought off by my ex-in-laws because they were wealthy, and I couldn't think of another reason for my own family to turn against me. I'm very sure my family warmed up to my in-laws from the start because of their money. James accused me of being a functioning alcoholic with serious rage issues. They made up situations in which I allegedly lost my temper and endangered my son, even though none of this had actually occurred. They needed to portray me as the villain. I expected some people to side with me, but all of my friends supported James, which I believe was owing to my breakdown at my son's birthday party. The worst betrayal, however, occurred when my parents and brother testified against me in court, stating I needed rehab and intense therapy before being permitted to see my son. They even suggested that James cheated because he was tired of coping with my unpredictable behavior. Despite a good fight with my counsel, I was unable to win custody of my son. The odds were stacked against me, and there was little I could do to prevent the inevitable. My lawyer and I worked hard to gather proof to prove I was a decent mother, but it all went to waste. The decision was revealed a few months ago, and it was the last time I saw my kid in person. I was granted supervised visiting privileges, but James never let me see him. It was pointless. My son is now 4 years old, and I'm constantly concerned that he'll forget me. According to a few relatives that remain on my side, my family continues to see my son. They routinely publish images with him, but I can't see him. James and my son live with my in-laws, and it appears that everyone but me gets to spend time with him. I cannot imagine something more heartbreaking. I've been living on memories of my son, thinking James was taking excellent care of him. I don't think I could have provided a comfortable life for him on my current pay, given I've only lately resumed working. I got a job at a friend's startup, but it doesn't pay well. Most of the employees are in their early 20s, working for experience and expecting to advance to better chances. Although I receive alimony, it is insufficient to maintain my previous lifestyle. I can't cut expenditures like a bachelor, but it's all I have right now. I had wanted to reapply for joint custody once my life was in order, but an unexpected chance presented itself a few weeks ago. My parents contacted me after months of silence to ask for assistance. It turned out that James was not the fantastic man they thought he was. My brother sent me an email requesting that I come over to their place since they had realized something crucial and wanted to come clean. They were tired of keeping secrets from me and wanted to be a part of my life again. I tried to ignore the email, but I couldn't quit thinking about how this might help me get my son back. So I went to their place that evening. I anticipated them to be living like kings after selling me out for money from my ex-in-laws. However, they were actually living in worse conditions than previously. My son, on the other hand, was overjoyed to see me, which added to an already wonderful evening. When I visited my family that day, they practically began pleading for forgiveness as soon as I walked in the door. Apparently, they recognized how severely they had messed up and there was no turning back, yet they still wanted me to forgive them. After the divorce, when my ex-in-laws and James were approached about the money they had been promised, James informed my family that it was no longer occurring. Apparently, they had just been told that they would be well compensated if they turned on me and testified in their favor. However, there was no written evidence to support it. If my relatives tried to go back and inform me about everything, James and his family would make sure they never saw my son again. So, for the protection of my son, they agreed to keep their mouths hidden, even though they had not been paid as promised. But things grew worse. They were not only pushed into testifying against me, but they were also treated as free babysitters. Every day, James would drop off our boy at my parents' house and they had to watch him while giving up their own time. It was really inconvenient because both my father and brother had jobs to attend to, and my mother couldn't handle all of the housework and caring for her grandchild on her own because she was getting older. So either my father or brother would have to work from home every day, which was growing increasingly tough for them, which is why they approached me to finally put an end to it. Apparently, they wanted to make a deal with me. They told me that if I provided them the money my ex-in-laws promised, they would represent me in court and ensure that I got custody of my son. I was going to recommend it myself, but it wasn't unexpected that they did. My family had always been materialistic, and this was especially true now that my father's business had failed and they were back to working for other people. Obviously they would want money more than ever now because my father wanted to retire but didn't have enough saved because he had invested all of his money in the firm, which eventually failed. They claimed they could make up a tale about how they were forced and coerced into testifying against me so they wouldn't be charged with perjury while under oath. They were unaware that I no longer required their assistance. I had been recording everything they said since the moment I came inside the house since I suspected something was wrong and didn't want to take any chances. So I had already recorded everything. Nonetheless, I encouraged my family to give me screenshots if they had any to prove they had been used and lied to, and I promised to help them. Following that, I departed. I'd already seen my son, and I had more than enough evidence to seek custody again. So that's what I did the next day with my lawyer. This time, I was ready. The custody lawsuit is still ongoing, but one thing is certain. I will be able to prove that none of the accusations James made against me were accurate, and that my family had been lying about everything all along. I've already listened to the recording, which has greatly influenced my decision. James and his lawyer are literally rushing for evidence, while I take it all in and enjoy the show. This is what they made me go through the last time, and now I get to do it to them. It's karma at its best, and I couldn't be happier. The only thing that hasn't been ideal is that my family has said I used them, just like James did, and that I had no right to record them without their permission and use it against them. However, in my state, that is perfectly legal and acceptable in court. I had no idea what they were talking about until they told me I had broken their trust by recording them. Bold statements from those who broke my confidence by siding with my ex-husband in the custody dispute. They believed that what I did was wrong because what they had done was out of necessity. They needed the money. But I didn't need to screw them over and expose them to perjury. They stated they had already committed to assist me and testify against James and his family, so I didn't need to go behind their backs. They keep contacting me, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to ignore. So am I a jerk for going over my family's back and putting them in danger of being charged with perjury? Update 1. Hello everyone. The custody dispute is still ongoing, and James and his lawyer are working tirelessly to show that they have been speaking the truth. Of course, they might be charged, and since it is a criminal, they could face jail time. But it is not my business right now, and it should not have been at any time. I'm not sure why I was worried about my parents when they obviously weren't concerned about me when it was my turn. So it's basically tit for tat right now. The comments section made me realize how entitled my parents were. Anyway, I've terminated connections with them. They can all go wherever they choose. I want my son to be okay and with me. I've waited long enough for this, and I'm not going to allow my family's victimization of themselves to stop me. If they can sell me out for money, I don't think I need to be loyal to them. I am done now. Update 2. So the good news is that I've finally gotten custody of my son. I don't think I've ever been this happy in my life. The second good news is that my in-laws, James and my family have been charged with perjury and they may face jail time. I'm sure they're regretting everything now, but I don't care since I got what I wanted. My son back, which was all I ever asked for. According to what I know, James is still attempting to fight it and avoid jail, but I don't think it will work. I've already applied for a restraining order against all of them because I've been receiving extremely frightening text messages, and I'm certain it's from these folks. Nobody else would want to hurt me, unless it was them. Things have been really busy and crazy over the last several weeks, but I'm finally learning to slow down. I badly want to spend more time with my son, therefore I chose to shorten my working hours. I've also considered selling my property and moving to a smaller apartment to save more money. I still have a lot of work to do. Repairing my relationship with my son will not be an easy process. Even though he is glad to be with me, he continues to inquire about his father and grandparents, and I am at a loss for words. He's told me a few things about them, such as how he spent the majority of his time with his grandparents and how his father and my in-laws were only available for a portion of the day. When I ask him how it was living with his grandparents, he makes a face and says it wasn't very good since everyone was continuously fighting. I completely get that. It sounds like they treated him poorly because they refused to accept responsibility. I can't comprehend why they'd treat a youngster that way, but I wouldn't put it past them. They are undoubtedly capable of making even a young child feel horrible about himself. But I don't have to worry about it anymore because he's with me. Update 3. Hello everyone. I can't believe I've returned here after nearly 5 years. My life is so different right now that it feels unreal. 5 years is a long time, and a lot has changed, the first being my son's age. We have a wonderful connection right now, and after many therapy sessions, he and I have finally become the mother and son we should have been from the start. He's growing into a wonderful man, and I'm confident he'll be nothing like his father. I simply know it in my heart. He's 9 years old and already a wonderful gentleman. I'm parenting him on my own, and I have full custody because James gave up and moved to Europe after getting out of jail. I cannot say I am surprised. He left with his co-worker, who he had been cheating on me with, and they are now married. I guess he merely replaced his biological son with another child. It's terrifying, but that's the type of person he is. My parents and my brother were released from jail after 6 months of good behavior. We haven't communicated, and they didn't try to contact me when they were freed, which I appreciate because I doubt I would have had much to say to them anyway. I have no news regarding my in-laws. I haven't heard from them in years, and that's for the best. I believe I am living a life now. God has blessed me with a solid job and a consistent salary. I'm still working at the company I started with, my friend's business, and it's doing pretty well. So life worked out beautifully for me and my son, and it was more than I could have hoped for. I am very appreciative of everything. My daughter asked me to meet my granddaughter after 17 years. Am I the asshole for saying don't care for her or her daughter and to never contact me again? Original post, June 28, 2024. I am not sure if I'm an going to provide some background. I am in my 60s now. I was married to my ex-wife, and we had a daughter. Our marriage was going through its ups and downs, but I was really close with our daughter. But as our marriage was going through its difficulties, I made a huge mistake I still regret to this day. I started having an affair with my coworker. She was in a violent, physically abusive relationship at home. We became friends at work, and things just escalated from there. She got an out from me, she got the support she needed to file for divorce from her husband, who is currently in jail now. The affair went nowhere and we called it off shortly after, but I was glad that she got out of her abusive relationship and that she was safe. But when my ex-wife found out about the affair, things didn't go well. She lashed out and said a lot of horrible things about me to our daughter, who was 15 at the time. I admitted full fault with the affair, but even after the divorce, I sensed that the distance between me and my daughter was growing, until one day, my daughter said she wasn't going to speak with me anymore, and she was going to cut me off from her life forever. That was the most painful thing anyone had ever said to me. I begged her to please reconsider. I still remember that day. But time passed on. My daughter kept her word, and after trying to connect with her for the first year, I gave up. I found out from one of my mutual friends that my ex-wife married a great guy. I was happy because I was hoping that would remove the hatred from my ex-wife and my ex-wife would advise our daughter to at least rekindle a relationship with me. But that never happened. I moved states a year later. I am at peace now, but still have some aching sadness. I have retired. Both my parents have passed away. My brother passed away tragically a couple of years ago. To be honest, I am waiting for my turn. I have only my dog and my sister left. A couple of hours ago my daughter called me on my phone. I haven't spoken to her in 17 years. I instantly recognized her voice, but I didn't feel anything. No happiness, no sadness, just indifference. She was crying a lot on the call, and we caught up on life. She's married, and she has a daughter who's now 12. She apologized for cutting off contact, and she says her mom asked her to reconnect with me, as her mom felt guilty about how everything played out. She said she really wanted me to meet her daughter, and her daughter was constantly asking about granddaddy. But I wasn't feeling anything. After we caught up on everything in our life, I told her I don't care about her or her daughter, and to never contact me again. I then hung up. Was I the AH? AITA has no consensus spot. OOP received the majority of YTAs, with few others. Comments: tidy nuggets. This is one of the most obvious YTA posts I've seen here, good fucking lord. Top palpitation 4681. Well, it's already been said, but you're the asshole. AFSpouse 123. YTA I hate when adults make very bad adult decisions that affect their children and then blame the children when they respond in a very childlike manner. Your daughter was a teenager. That is a rough time for kids even when their home life is stable. You gave her one whole year before you cut bait and gave up on her. Then you moved away. You told your daughter that she wasn't important enough to fight for and she believed you. Now that she is an adult with a child of her own, she has reached out to you and you again told her she wasn't important to you. She now knows she was probably right to cut you out the first time. OOP updated the next day. Same post, June 29, 2024. Update. Look, I was extremely drunk last night. The words which came out of my mouth weren't the best, and my comments on my post weren't great either. Seeing how everyone said I was the AH, I decided to call my daughter again an hour ago. I didn't really expect her to pick up the call, but she picked up immediately. I apologized last night, and she said there was no need to apologize. I then sent her a link to this Reddit post on messages, and told her I know I was the AH, and thousands said so. She again said I wasn't the AH. She started crying again. I told her she's free to come to my house anytime the next 4 months, because after that I will be leaving the country with my sister and our dog. Our parents left us a nice farmhouse in their home country, and we will be spending the rest of our lives there. I sent her my address in messages, and my daughter said she'd come with her husband and her daughter by the end of next week. She asked if she was welcome to stay there for multiple days, and I told her she could stay for however long she wanted, as our house was spacious enough. Update 2. I have moved to the farmland, and am looking forward to spending the rest of my life here with my dog and my sister. It is peaceful and scenic. My daughter did come by to visit me with her husband and her daughter before I left the country. It was really nice seeing my granddaughter, who looked a lot like her mom. They stayed over at our place for a week, and we had a good time. However, it got a little sad when I told my daughter in private I had no interest in being a grandfather, and just didn't have strong emotions for it. I think those words really stung her, and my daughter did cry a lot after I said those words. My daughter wanted to rekindle our relationship, but it's just too late now. I told my daughter she's free to visit me in the farmland anytime she wants and the house is always open, but I doubt she'll be visiting anytime soon. The week she stayed over at my place before I left the country was a final goodbye for us. She has my number, but she hasn't called or texted since she left, and I haven't called or texted her either. That's the update for the many interested. This will probably be my only update. Comments. Commenter 1. I'm definitely about to be an outlier here based on these comments, and I'm going to stick to it. Based on the original post from 81 days ago, where not surprisingly most people called you TA, not only are you TA, you're a deadbeat selfish father and a cheater. You made your bed, you had a child and then cheated on your wife. You then blamed that child for your disgusting betrayal. And this is about to be odd after calling you TA, but I am proud that you decided to speak up and tell the truth. No child deserves to have a father who loves her so little, blames her for his mistakes, and now refuses to see her or his granddaughter because of his mistakes. Thank you for at least being honest that you are a terrible human being and not wasting her time. After my dad died, my mom threw out all of his belongings to make room for her partner and forced me out, saying she didn't want filth from the past. My father died 3 weeks ago, following a protracted illness. He had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis a few years back. He fought valiantly, but he soon became unable to continue, and we lost him. It was a great emotional blow for me because I was much closer to my father than to my mother. I, 18M, had no idea how to feel, and I was just starting to deal with my sadness when my mother decided to toss me out of the house so she could move in with her boyfriend. Within 1 week, I lost my father and discovered that my mother had been having an affair with a coworker all along. I'm not sure if my father knew about it, but it doesn't make a difference. I was outraged when she brought home her boyfriend just 4 days after my father died, and we had a heated argument after he left. She told me that this romance had been going on for a long time, basically since my father was diagnosed. She stated I had no idea how tough it was for her to have a sick partner, and so I had no right to blame her for finding love elsewhere. She also stated that she was aware that she would eventually lose her spouse, therefore she saw nothing wrong with what she was doing. I informed her that what she did was extremely pathetic. She told me I had to leave, so I paid for it the next day. She didn't want any filth from the past in her home anymore, and she wasn't just talking about me. She and her boyfriend had begun moving a lot of belongings from my father's room in the morning. By the time I awoke, there were crates in the front yard. My mother informed me that I could either take the boxes with me or burn them. Either way, they were all leaving her house. They gave me a few hours to gather my belongings and depart. I opted to spend my time packing my possessions rather than disputing with them. My mother's actions suggested she was too far gone, and I didn't want to sacrifice my dignity by speaking to her. We had pretty well stopped getting along a few months before my father died because she was constantly fighting with him. I didn't believe it was proper to dispute trivial matters and be so mean to him, especially because we knew he wasn't going to make it. After learning of the affair, I lost all respect for her, therefore I was relieved to be going. I made a few phone calls, and after a while, my girlfriend said she could speak with her parents and allow me to stay with them for a few weeks until I could get back on my feet and make other plans. I am quite appreciative of that. I've been living with them since my mother booted me out, and they've been quite nice, particularly my girlfriend. We've just been dating for 3 months, and she didn't need to do this, but I'm grateful to her. On the day I left, I grabbed the boxes that my mother had thrown away, which included my father's stuff, as well as my own. I figured I couldn't let them burn since that would mean losing the remainder of what my father left behind. This made my room really cramped due to all of the items, but it was worth it. For the past few days I'd avoided even glancing at those crates, let alone rummaging through them. The reason was simple: it reminded me too much of my father, and I was not prepared to confront it. I knew I'd end up bawling on the floor since I already missed him so much. So I'd been avoiding it like the plague. However, 2 days ago, I made the decision to go through some of the boxes, regardless of how difficult it was. I was extremely lucky because the first box I chose was full of documents and documentation from my father's room, from before he was taken to the hospital in his final weeks of life. He had been working from his room in the house because he was in no fit to go out every day. My father worked as a tax consultant for a large corporation, so there was a lot of paperwork involved. I didn't comprehend much of it, so I put it aside. I got to the bottom of the box and found a blue manila file with my name on it. That was it. What I discovered there is going to finish my mother, and I'm here for it. Going through the contents of that folder, I learned that my father had really left a will, which my mother was presumably unaware of, or perhaps she did and was just not telling the lawyer. Not only did I uncover the will, but also several additional documents, including the house deed. It found out that the house did not belong to both of my parents, but rather to my father. After reading the will, I learned that my father had left the house and all of the money in his account to me. My mother had only received his car, which was still a huge deal because my father drove a lovely automobile, and she had taken ownership of their holiday property. I recognized my mother had no right to kick me out of the house because it did not belong to her, now or at any moment. It was originally my father's, and it is now mine. So far, my father's lawyer had informed me that his assets would be frozen until the court determined how they would be distributed. However, as soon as I discovered those documents, I called him and informed him of my findings. I invited him to my girlfriend's house and asked if I may move back into my own house, as my father's will clearly specified that the house belonged to me, not my mother. He affirmed that I was free to do so if I wanted, and that my mother had no authority to kick me out without appropriate notice. That was everything I needed to know. The lawyer would manage the will's execution, but I planned to address the problem with my mother. I called her right away and informed her I'd found my father's will. He had indicated that he would leave me the house and all of the money in his bank account. She remained silent for a few minutes before saying it didn't matter to her. But now that the tables had been turned, I asked her to leave the premises. The house never belonged to her, and she had done nothing to deserve it. She'd been nasty to my father and now she was being horrible to me. I informed her that I wanted her out by the end of the week. That's when she began groveling. To be honest, I anticipated her to argue with me because that is how she has always been, argumentative and unpleasant to everyone around her. Instead, she begged me not to say or do anything because she had convinced her partner to move in by promising to handle everything. Apparently, her co-worker was married but had recently filed for divorce, and his ex-wife was demanding a large sum of alimony, which was understandable given that he cheated. He was concerned about it, and my mother promised him that she would manage everything for him. This meant allowing him to live with her so he didn't have to worry about housing or rent and could concentrate on his divorce. If I approached them and stated that the house did not even belong to her, she would be screwed. So if I talked to her boyfriend, she would not only be homeless, but but also alone. I'm not a cruel person, so I told my mother she could keep behaving as if she had the means to help her partner, but I didn't want her to live in my house anymore. I vowed not to say anything about what she had told me as long as she agreed to leave the house by the end of the week. I didn't care where she went, all I needed was for her to leave so I could return to my home. Then she started telling me it wasn't fair, it was blackmail, and I couldn't do this to her. I reminded her of how cruelly she had treated me just a few days before, so it was absurd that she wanted me to consider her circumstances now. I did not believe I was being unjust. After disagreeing with me for a while, she began crying on the phone, saying she couldn't believe I was treating her like this simply because she wanted to be happy in her life for once. She claimed she didn't want to marry my father, but she was already pregnant with me and her family had pushed her to. She claimed my father had never treated her properly, had always been preoccupied with his work, and had never made enough time for her. She was only trying to have a good life with her partner, and the only reason she kicked me out was because she knew I was like my father. I wouldn't stand in the way of her happiness. She stated that my actions were proving her point. I didn't know what to say at this point, so I told her she had 1 week and hung up. Since then, I've been feeling rather guilty. I'm not sure why, but hearing her cry over the phone made me feel horrible. I'm not sure if this is because I'm doing anything wrong, or if it's simply because I'm a sensitive person who can't bear hearing people cry. I'm bewildered, so I'm here to ask, AITA, why did you tell my mother and her boyfriend they had 1 week to vacate the house? Edit. I don't have any family in this state, so I had to rely on my friends for aid. I've spoken with my grandparents because I'll be attending college in a few months and will need their support to handle expenditures. After describing the issue to them, they severed relations with my mother. She's probably not worse off for it, because she never got along with her own parents and only had a cordial relationship with her in-laws. Regarding the will, I'm not sure why my father left the house and all of his money to me, or why he hadn't discussed it with his lawyer. I did ask my father's lawyer about it and he revealed that he had been urging my father to prepare a will since he was diagnosed, but my father kept claiming he would do it later. Now, it appears that he left behind a holographic will because there were no witnesses or lawyers involved, which may make it simpler for my mother to fight it. We'll deal with it as it arises. Fortunately, in our state, even such wills are regarded as genuine, and I'm thinking my father was aware of this. As for why he left the most essential stuff to me, I'm guessing it's because he presumably drafted this document while at home, and my mother had been arguing with him over nothing in particular. She was only arguing with him because she could, and he couldn't just leave her, no matter how upset he was. I suppose that is why he took this decision, and to be honest, I believe it was a good one. To address your questions, I don't know my father's specific motives, but here is my theory. Update 1. Hello, I am still living with my partner, and after reading the comments, I have decided to rethink my decision. I will continue to insist that my mother leave the house, but I have chosen to modify the terms of my agreement. After I posted the last update, many of you urged that I consider the possibility that my mother will fight the will, which would cause me a lot of grief. I thought about it, and you were correct. I didn't think about it at first, so I called my mother back. I informed her that I was now willing to give her 6 months to locate a place and move out of the house. She looked astonished when I mentioned it because we hadn't spoken since our last conversation. She didn't have an explanation for her change of heart, but I did tell her that since I was giving her 6 months, she needed to swear not to fight my father's will. Hopefully, 6 months would be enough time to verify the legality of the will in court, and then we could begin dividing the assets. I suppose 6 months would also allow my mother's boyfriend enough time to finalize his divorce. Personally, I would have liked to generate a lot of hardship for my mother and ask her to leave within a week, making sure she felt as bad as I did. But hey, I need to. Right now, it's more vital for me not to act rashly because that will only lead to difficulties for me rather than her. She stated she would think about it before agreeing to anything, so we'll see what she says. Update 2. Hello, 3 days ago I told my mother that if she promised not to fight the will I would let her stay in the house for another 6 months. I was leaving for college in 3 months anyhow, so I assumed I'd ask my grandparents to send me money so I could buy an apartment. I did not want to burden my fiancée by staying with her for so long, but her parents insisted that I do so. My girlfriend and I have only been together for 3 months, but we genuinely love each other, so she said the same thing. With my living arrangement fixed, I wasn't in a hurry to have my mother leave the house because it didn't make sense. I hoped my mother would agree to my demands so that I could have my father's lawyer sign off on them. If she signed a legal contract, she wouldn't be able to back out. I was expecting to hear from her with good news, but instead she called me today and asked if I expected her to sign any paperwork or contracts for our agreement. I instantly replied yes since I did not want to mislead her. And to be honest, I did not trust her. This was a given. She paused for a few seconds before telling me that she was not interested in signing a contract. That annoyed me because it implied that if she knew she had to stick to it or face the repercussions, she was hesitant to make any promises. I was upfront with her, telling her that if she wasn't willing to sign a legal agreement, my offer was off the table. I told her I didn't trust her at all, and she shouldn't be shocked considering her recent behavior towards me, which has been nothing short of nasty. I expected her to disagree, but she told me she agreed, though she also didn't trust me, insisting that I was unquestionably my father's kid. I had no idea what that had to do with anything, because neither my father nor I had ever done anything that could be considered untrustworthy. The only thing she had against my father was that she had been forced to marry him because she became pregnant with me, and my grandparents decided it was best to proceed with the marriage. That is not my fault, nor is it my father's fault. If she didn't want to marry him, she should have stood up for her rights. Besides, I am not even sure how true her narrative is. I asked my grandparents about it, and they stated they hadn't really pressured her. But they had only encouraged her not to raise me on her own because she was so young at the time, and my parents appeared to be in love. Both of my grandparents suggested they marry, but there was no pressure on them. The other issue my mother faced with my father was that he worked too much. I don't believe that's a major issue because, of course, he had to work. My mother didn't work for the first few years of their marriage and finally started working about 7 years ago. She obtained the position since one of her friends and her friend's spouse founded the company. Otherwise, she would not have found the position she currently brags about. She claims to be an independent lady, but that is only because my father has always supported her. She had no right to say she didn't trust me because I'm my father's son. I was annoyed, so I told her she could do anything she wanted, but because she refused to sign a contract, I wanted her out of the house. I hung up before she could say anything. She tried phoning me numerous times after that, but I was too annoyed to speak with her. She hasn't called in the last half hour, but I'm confident she will. I will only talk to her after I've calmed down. Update 3. My mother did not call me again following our last talk, as I described in my previous report. I waited for her to call for the next 2 days, but she just did today. I was nervous because I wasn't sure what to anticipate. To be honest, on the one hand, I genuinely wanted her to agree to the deal I proposed, in which I let her reside in the house for 6 months until she could make alternative arrangements, in exchange for her not contesting the will. I thought I was being fair, but after our last disagreement I wasn't sure she would agree. When she called today I tried to be kind and civil because this wasn't just about her. I also had something to lose. I was expecting positive news, but as soon as I picked up, she informed me that she had made her decision. She opted not to sign any contracts. Instead, she was determined to fight the will, and she had even consulted with a lawyer about it. I was taken aback because this obviously meant she would no longer be residing in the house, which belonged to me. I told her that if she contests the will, she will no longer be able to live in my house. I hoped that would bring her back to her senses, but she said I had no authority to kick her out because the will had not yet been ratified. She had a point, but she also had no authority to kick me out because we were in a bit of a gray area right now. I told her we'd probably have to live together until the probate was completed. That concept clearly made her uncomfortable, and after a few seconds, she informed me she'd look for a place to live, but she'd take her time because I had no right to tell her what she should do. I assured her again that she could take as much time as she wanted, but that I would be back by the end of the week. She began ranting, accusing me of being a bother and claiming she had done nothing to deserve the harassment I was subjecting her to. I almost laughed because her claim that I was bothering her was the biggest joke of the century. She kept attempting to rant, but I hung up because we had nothing else to talk about. She'd made her decision and I didn't think I could change it anymore. I'm going to do what I believe is right and she can't stop me. Her partner, who is going through his own divorce, will not be much assistance to her either. I, on the other hand, have my family, girlfriend, and friends on my side. In fact, I believe I will tell her boyfriend the truth about my mother because I have been withholding information for far too long. Since she has made up her mind, I have decided to be an inconvenience, and there is no reason to keep this a secret any longer. Update 4. I did it. I informed my mother's lover the truth about the situation at the house. I don't think he had any notion until recently, which is strange considering he lived with my mother. This is a major deal to keep from your boyfriend, especially since she was still in contact with me, and I'm sure he would have asked about it. But I assume she's pretty adept at keeping secrets. After all, she hid her affair for a few years. It was not difficult to reach him. I just searched him up on Facebook and sent him a message containing proof. I also explained why I was telling him the truth now and not earlier, because I had been negotiating with my mother. but since she had made it apparent that she was not interested, I believed he had a right to know the truth. I sent the message 2 days ago and I finally heard from my mother today. I was expecting an eruption, but I didn't realize it would come so late. Anyway, she tried contacting me this morning, but I blocked her out of frustration. I've also blocked her on social media. When she ran out of other ways to contact me, she set up a fake email account and sent me a message from that address. In the email, she said that I should be pleased now because I had caused so much drama between her and her boyfriend for no reason. She claimed he had decided to leave her and return to his wife to attempt to work things out, blaming her for the entire situation, which, to be honest, he was correct about. I'm not really sure what she's furious about. The message was lengthy, and it contained warnings that she would make sure I paid a high price for this. All I could think was, she can bring it on. Truth be told, she no longer scares me. I've already lost all I could lose, and there's only one direction to go. Up. So, I'm looking forward to the court case. Update 5. Hello guys. I haven't kept you updated on what's been going on in my life over the last year, and I believe it's time I did. As I previously stated, I was looking forward to the court process, and my mother did end up fighting the will. The case got to court, and my father's attorney and I fought as hard as we could. Long story short, after 8 months, we eventually received a favorable ruling. The will was validated and upheld. This happened 2 months ago, and I'm still really pleased with it. My mother had to give up the house, and we no longer communicate with her. I have no idea what she is up to, but I am delighted she received her karma. Even her own parents have stopped communicating with her, so I'm pretty sure she's not living a joyful life right now. My neighbors told me that on the day she moved out, her boyfriend came to help her. So I'm betting they're back together, because no self-respecting lady would return to a man who had cheated on her. I'm very sure his wife rejected him, so he crawled back to my mother to make things right, and she gratefully accepted him back. Honestly, I'm pleased they're together. They deserve each other. I'm confident my father is beaming down at me from heaven because I've demonstrated resilience, strength, and a willingness to stand up for what is right. I'm in college now, set to begin my 2nd year. My grandparents are currently supporting me financially, and they will continue to do so until I find work, for which I'm glad. I know many of you are intrigued about my relationship. She also attends college, and we meet on weekends. In fact, we're arranging a little break for just the 2 of us this weekend. We are still going strong and are really serious about each other. Life is currently serene, and I am grateful to be at this point. Getting here was the most difficult part. After that, everything else felt easy.